Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the regular May 4th meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Goury. As you all know, we continue to operate under revised rules in terms of how we conduct meetings. Tonight's regular meeting of Council will be held in accordance with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272, and Ministerial Order number 083. Therefore, members of the public are required to observe meetings virtually and not attend in person. Delegation requests for unrelated council matters will not be permitted under this order and throughout the duration of the pandemic. Delegation requests related to agenda matters such as a developer that would like to come to speak to his or her application or a member of the public to speak to an item on the agenda will be allowable as physical distancing requirements could be maintained. Question period will be suspended throughout the duration of this order being in effect. Council will attend via Zoom or in person at these regular meetings, maintaining physical distancing at all times. We have one councillor incoming via Zoom tonight and other councillors spread throughout the chamber, which isn't apparent to those of you at home. And finally, members of staff that are partaking in the meeting will be spread out in the auditorium in the marked seating or outside in the lobby area, which is again what is happening tonight. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Goury, please.
Thank you, Worship. I'll start by stating we should have updated your intro because we are starting a new version of question period tonight, so having it suspended. However, there's probably going to be some tweaks to that throughout based on some feedback from Council. And for late items this evening is item 8D, allocation of unallocated pedestrian funds. We're adding a petition dated May 1st, 2020, titled Petition to Install Rectangular Rapid Flashing Beacons, RRFB, at the Bruce and Albion Crosswalk. And that's it, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Motion for the approval of the agenda is amended. So moved. Moved, Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Turley, I assume you're a yes, and yes you say, unless you say no. A motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Moved, Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favour? Motion carries. Thank you. The Mayor's report. Happy to re-announce what the City announced on Friday, and that is that we're working and supporting Loaves and Fishes Food Bank, Nanaimo Food Share, and Island Roots Market by providing access to our recreation facilities that would otherwise be closed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. What that means is that bottle donations will continue to be welcomed by the food bank and can be dropped off at multiple locations across the city. The Island Roots Market Cooperative is preparing to open the Island Roots Market on Wednesday, May 13th at the outdoor location at Bevan Park next to the Centennial Building. Good news for local growers and for food security in our own area, and I know will please a number of people who are looking forward to organic and local produce. The Nanaimo Food Share will be using the Centennial Building at Bevan Park to fill food boxes for the Good Food Box program, which is a very important program and which supports local nonprofit food service providers at recreation facilities. A very positive step for all of us. We are, notwithstanding the rain this week, coming into fire season, and we wish to prevent the spread of wildfires by practicing Fire Smart principles. We're always spreading the word about this, the way residents can prevent or slow the spread of wildfires through implementing the Fire Smart principles. Key points as follows. We've been recognized as a Fire Smart community, firstly, with some pride. Nanaimo Fire Rescue will support community champions to assist them in establishing Fire Smart programs in their neighborhoods. And you can contact the fire department, of course. And just a little reminder, most brush fires occur in the city due to human carelessness for poorly discarded smoking materials or not properly extinguished fires. So please bear that in mind. We do not need to add to the stressors that exist in this community as a result of our economic woes and the pandemic. In that light, the province and the city are working to protect the most vulnerable in our community during the COVID-19 crisis. In response to requests from BC Housing, the province and the city have agreed to use a portion of 285 Prideaux Street, the old Community Services Building, to operate an emergency response Centre. That will provide approximately 35 emergency shelter spaces for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic for those who require that kind of isolation in order to prevent any spread of the virus further. We also launched our online form for submitting agenda-related questions to Council, which Ms. Gurry referred to earlier, which allows for changes pursuant to Ministerial Order number M083. And what that means is we have asked that people, if they wish, can submit questions via online forms. We've received the number tonight. They will be referenced at the question period portion of the meeting. But question period at committees will continue to be suspended in the ordinary way until such time as we can return to regular process. May 3rd to 9th is Emergency Preparedness Week. As together to flatten the COVID-19 curve and support the collective response in reducing risk to the community, we are realizing more now than ever how important it is to prepare for the unexpected. Many City of Nanaimo residents have started to build an emergency kit, and there is no time like today to complete it. A few simple actions will help you build upon all the hard work you have already in place. A pandemic this time, God forbid it should be an earthquake, a major fire, some kind of a storm disaster. We know we have seen those disasters around the world. So it is a good time to remind ourselves, as many people used to make jokes about the Boy Scouts, always be prepared. City park users are reminded about unauthorized trails building. Unfortunately, the city's become aware of a number of unauthorized mountain bike trails being built in Lindley Valley Park, and remind residents and park users that the building of trails on any parkland is not permitted. Anyone engaged in this activity is asked to stop immediately and is advised that such activity is subject to fines under the Parks, Recreation and Culture Regulation bylaw, and anyone who notices this activity is asked to contact bylaw services immediately. I might add that the city has been in touch with the established mountain bike clubs in Nanaimo who are not involved in this activity. It is thought that some of this activity is being undertaken by an individual or small groups of people who are unattached to the established clubs that have performed so well in our community. Finally, I want to remind everyone that yesterday, 133 years ago, on May the 3rd, 1887, 2 explosions occurred at the No. 1 Esplanade mine. That accident claimed immediately the lives of 149 miners, followed by the death of one of the rescuers. The flags at City Hall were lowered to half-mast on Sunday in recognition of that event. It is and remains, sadly, the worst mining disaster in the history of this province, which has a long history of mining, and the second worst in the country after the 1914 Hillcrest mine disaster in Alberta that killed 189 miners. Forgive me if my voice got a little emotional. As we struggle through this pandemic and we feel our lives have been disrupted and that life has somehow become harsh, I'm going to give you some numbers that may put all of this in perspective. On that day, 126 children lost their father, 46 women in a time when most women had no occupation or income of their own lost their husbands, and the total population with 150 lives lost in this community was roughly 2,000 people. So there is a memorial plaque, as has been there for a number of years, to remember those miners who died at the site of the No. 1 Esplanade mine on Milton Street. And as I had said earlier, no single event scarred our city and its people more than this disaster, and it is our obligation to never let this event disappear from our community's memory. It is an integral part of this community's history, but this community's resilience to carry on and survive from that is also a testament to the character of the people who helped to build this city and who we are proud to represent every day as we come to council and work on their behalf. Thank you for listening. I would ask for a motion for adoption of the consent items. Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We have a fairly lengthy agenda tonight, so I'm asking everyone to try and be as relatively brief as possible in the circumstances while doing their job. Under reports, the first is the committee and task force meetings during COVID-19. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report is to seek some clarification from Council. On April the 20th, Council made a motion at the special Council meeting to reconvene committees and task forces, and there was some other discussion around that wasn't clearly dealt with, so this report is just seeking some clarification and asking for Council to make the recommendation. However, I just need to ask for if anyone of Council wishes to move this recommendation, that for number 1, that the Board of Variance be removed from this recommendation, because it is a legislated board and it was not stalled during when you put the rest of the committee and task forces on hold, and it's not supposed to be part of this recommendation, so that was my error. So this is just to seek clarification on the Design Advisory Panel, asking Council to direct staff to reinstate the Finance and Audit Committee meetings as of June. And the reason for June is because most of the special council meetings as of lately have been dealing with the finance and audit type matters. So there isn't a need for one until June. It's to allow for Governance and Priorities Committee meetings to be scheduled as special council meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is to allow for items of Governance and Priorities Committee nature, however, some special council items thrown in there, and the ability for council to make recommendations and motions directly and not go through the committee format. And based on discussion at that April 20th meeting, to seek further clarification on discontinuing and suspending indefinitely the Council Remuneration Task Force initiative.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry. Removing item 1 of the recommended motion. Someone prepared to make the motion? Moved Councillor Martman. Seconded Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Bonner?
We're only removing the Board of Variance.
Yes.
Number 1, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Not the Design Advisory Panel. Any further discussion? All those in...
Sorry, is this just on removing number 1 or
Yes.
the entire package?
No,
Number 1.
just the Board of Variance.
Okay, thank you.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is traffic calming in Nanaimo. Mr. Sims and Mr. Rosen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. There's 3 major reports in front of Council this morning, sort of emanating from our transportation group. And this initiated as a governance and priorities topic about pedestrians and traffic calming, and just to try and provide some background on the historic approach to pedestrian infrastructure and traffic calming within the city. So this is where we were, and this is what we've used to date. As Council is aware, we're sort of getting into the active transportation planning as part of our OCP, and this is an opportunity to look forward and take what we've got, build on it, and potentially change it. So there will be a large sort of public input to this. So the main intent for this evening was to bring those reports forward and put them in front of Council for your information. So some of the points that you've noted is that the traffic calming guidelines are rather old, and it's true, but this is the opportunity to update them. They've been what we've used, so now it's about looking forward. So as I mentioned, 3 reports. The intention is the traffic calming and the pedestrian infrastructure reports help inform the discussion around pedestrian unallocated funding, or the allocation of the $300,000 line item that's available in Council's budget. And so that's the 3rd report for discussion. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Rose and Ms. Thomas, who've prepared and who are the backbone of our transportation group, and they'll be happy to run you through the presentation and answer questions, and I'll come back if need be.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Mr. Rosen, good evening.
Evening. Thanks for
All right, so
I have to ask one question right off the start. Is that Nanaimo?
oh, no. No, that is the first version of traffic calming in the city of Vancouver, and it didn't have signs.
Ours look better.
Much, yeah. So the report you have before you is to provide some background, some insight into traffic calming within the city of Nanaimo. It highlights why we do it, when we do it, how we do it, and what we are looking forward to in the future. When we talk about traffic calming, quite often everybody thinks of traffic circles or speed humps, diverters, partial closures, full road closures. But it's really important to understand that the first line of defense against traffic management is a well-planned network with appropriately designed streets. So they need to align with the land use that they support. I don't know if I should touch this or not, but. Over the past 100 years or so, the transportation system has seen a pretty dramatic cyclical evolution. In advance of the boom of the automobile, transportation networks, which are commonly referred to as traditional, were fairly grid-like. They had a lot of redundancy. They were very small scale. They were more pedestrian-oriented than our slightly newer conventional type curvilinear ones. These conventional ones were designed more in terms of generating safety for the automobile. The roads were a little bit wider. They were a little bit more open. They didn't have things for people to run into. Unfortunately, what they ended up doing was creating a situation where speed came up. And so they also weren't particularly walkable or bikeable. We're now seeing the trend to come full circle back down to that more community-centered, small-scale, high-redundancy networks, which we're seeing in sort of the complete streets format. This is really a product of changing priorities, changing technology, and just an overall evolution of seeing things and taking lessons away from what we've experienced. Throughout this evolution and growth, there's also been an evolution of priorities and desires and benchmarks for a successful transportation system. At the earliest stages, efficiency and mobility was the highest priority. People wanted to get as quickly and with the least energy from point A to point B, whether they're walking or they're moving goods. Then things started to progress and evolve, and safety became a factor. And so it needed to be a safe and efficient transportation system. We've now evolved to the point we're at now, where not only do we want a safe and efficient transportation system, but we need it to be sustainable, and we want it to create a livable community. It needs to not just be looked at as the roads are a place to move people and goods, but they're actually a part of our community, whether they're beside a park, whether they are a way to and from school, or whatever role our residents choose to make them into, whether it's a night market or for moving goods. The OCP, the Transportation Master Plan, and our traffic calming guidelines all place safety, efficiency, livability, and sustainability as high priorities. Being a city that is over 100 years old, we currently have a little bit of everything. Some of our communities or some of our neighborhoods are built using a traditional grid type system, the university area, downtown. And then our slightly newer neighborhoods have evolved through the more conventional with lots of windy streets. Some of them need to be there because of the topography, but some of them are there because that was the trend of the day. Lots of cul-de-sacs, dead ends. And now we're starting to see newer subdivisions and developments come through that are starting to revert back to that more traditional network with a strong redundancy, smaller scale, de-emphasizing speed in favor of higher priorities. We are growing and evolving and adapting our planning thought processes and our design requirements. But we still have a lot of systems in place that we need to address and deal with when they come up. And for that, we have our traffic calming guidelines. And the document is a little over 10 years old now. But it is a guideline, and it is intended to take us through a systematic process to receive concerns, process them, and come up with a solution for them. And so I'm not going to go through all of the details of it because it's kind of time-consuming and cumbersome, but there's a few really important things that I need to emphasize. One, we collect data because we need to make evidence-based decisions. We need to understand whether there is or is not a speeding issue, whether there is or is not an excessive amount of volume on a particular road. We need to start small and escalate things only as necessary. We don't want to overregulate or encumber the network so that we're creating other problems down the road. And we also need to work with the community. I've had traffic calming projects where we've gone through all of these preliminary steps. We've collected the data, we have looked at it and felt that the speed or the volume is not appropriate, but the community has come back and told us, no, we're okay with it. There are some people that aren't comfortable with it, but as a community as a whole, we are. Through all of that process and sort of with the starting small approach, once we've identified what the concern or the problem may be, we need to look at the larger network to see if there's some small incremental changes that could be made there that could alleviate the problem. Maybe we could add a turn lane somewhere, or we could add some signage. I think through the Departure Bay Road project, we sort of identified that traffic, like speed reduction signage is not that effective over the long term. Another thing that we can look at is some more significant enhancements to a network. Do we need to add a traffic signal? Do we need to add another road? Do we need to look at a road that exists right now that is operating in a way that we wouldn't have expected it to? Sometimes roads and systems evolve without our input or without our sort of guidance. And we need to look at these and determine whether or not we should continue, whether we should change the road to adapt to how people are using it, or whether we should restrict how it's being used to ensure that it does continue to operate the way we envisioned it. Those are probably the two most extreme approaches. A traffic signal these days is probably between $500,000 and $750,000, depending on how much road work is required. New roads can be multi-million dollar ventures. And that's if there's not property acquisitions required to do that. So the majority of the time, if we do feel that there's a problem and we do have support from the community, we do have to come back and determine what an appropriate form of traffic calming would be for that situation. If it's speed, a traffic circle or speed humps are often the first choice. If it's volume, some sort of a diverter is usually the method of choice. Sometimes it's a combination of things. Sometimes it's a step 1, step 2, step 3 to see what needs to be done to get to that point. So once we've identified a solution, engaged with the community, and then gained council support to move forward with it, we implement it. And one of the last and most important steps in this process is to actually go back and determine whether we were successful or not. Sometimes we have partial success. Sometimes we get a little bit of a speed reduction. Sometimes we don't. One of the quick and simple solutions that we've implemented a few years ago gave us a little bit of a benefit. We put a center line down Boxwood Road. We saw a 2 km/h speed reduction on the majority of traffic. Not huge, but considering the effort put into it, we think it was a pretty successful exercise. So we do need to come back and review these things, make sure that they were successful, make sure that we haven't caused any other issues to come about. Because again, measuring success can be interpreted by other people everybody can interpret the success in a different manner. People on a street that now is much slower might be very happy. The people who are using that street to go to and from work might not be as happy having to go over a speed hump or having to take a longer route around something. So it's a delicate balance that we need to work with to try and find that, to try and maintain an efficient and effective transportation system while maintaining livable and sustainable and safe and efficient communities. So a couple of examples of some of our more successful projects. We've got Oak Ridge Drive. That was a speeding shortcutting issue to bypass Hammond Bay Road. Kennedy, I believe that is, at Victoria, that was a shortcutting issue as well. And then a traffic circle at Hecate, and that was a speeding issue. So some of the things that can be done with a successful traffic calming plan or a successfully planned and implemented road network are having families go out on their bikes, having kids, I'm not sure I'd advocate for playing in the street, but being able to use the street for something more than just moving cars to and from. Some of our traffic calming efforts so far have not been completely successful. Some of you may remember some of the conversations about Jackson Road. We have tried several things out there and have cut down on some of the issues, but I actually was just told that maybe it's coming back. So, version 3.0. So, as we look forward, I'm going to come back to the original comment I made, and the best line of defense about managing traffic is a well-planned and well-designed transportation system. We want to have small-scale streets that have an appropriate amount of space allocated to each mode, and we want to have a redundant, efficient, and well-laid-out road network to ensure that people can get to and from where they need to go efficiently, while still being able to walk and bike if they choose to do that, and doing all of this at safe and appropriate speeds. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, through you to Mr. Rose. One of the questions I have is, I know that you guys are going to be coming forward with a report, I believe, because I'm concerned about Lost Lake Road, where there's no sidewalks, there's nothing up there, and there's a lot of issues there, and I realize that people are not asking for a sidewalk because they realize the cost is prohibitive, but are you going to be looking at some options for traffic calming, whether it be speed humps, speed bumps? I'm personally more of a fan of humps because they slow better than bumps, but that's just me.
So we've been working with the Lost Lake community for probably several years now, and we have gone through that progression of data, gathering the data, identifying the concerns, and we've tried with some signage, and we actually just had a meeting last week with fire services to discuss some options. And so we are working through all of this discussion. We've definitely heard loud and clear that the community has had enough. And so at this point, we're going to flesh out some details for a strategy, and then we'll be engaging the community as a whole, because that really is one of the challenges for Lost Lake Road is that it really is it's a low functioning major road. It's a fairly low volume road, it doesn't carry a whole lot of traffic, but the speeds that people are traveling on it are quite high. And so we've always struggled with this balance of maintaining mobility while addressing the speed concerns. So we're going to be developing this plan, going out to the community, and then once we have that feedback, we'll be coming back to council.
Just as a follow-up, Your Worship, signs never work, in my opinion, because people, if they're going to speed, they're going to speed, and that road is a great road to speed on for people because it's got all the curves. That's why I'm not a fan of narrow roads, because it actually does encourage speeding, so you can cut the corners and stuff, but that's just my perspective. But I do appreciate that you're working with the community, because I think there's been a lot more building in there. There's a lot more subdivisions probably from the time the study was done. That's why I voted against one of them, because that road can't take a lot more high speed. There is no place for pedestrians to walk except for on the shoulders, and there's not a lot of shoulders, but, and I do know, and I really want to thank the residents from there, that they realize that a sidewalk is not the answer right now for them, and they just are wanting to work with the city, so thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Councillor Himmons, and then Councillor Brown, then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. My first question is just growing off of Councillor Armstrong's. Those reports that you've worked on for the neighbourhood, are they available for the neighbourhood's review?
The traffic calming,
All of the research you've conducted on Lost Lake Road, is that available for their advocacy efforts?
it hasn't been summarized and published. It's just been sort of communication to and from. You know, we told them, yes, we've collected some data. Here's what the answer or what we discovered, and this is what we're going to do. It hasn't ever been sort of reconciled into one report to say, here it is. So
Just, I've had questions from residents saying, hey, can we read that report? And I don't know what the piece is between us collecting the data and then sharing it with the neighborhood. But that actually, sorry.
I was just going to say, typically what will happen is we will get a letter, email, phone call from a person. And so usually we have that one-on-one dialogue.
Okay.
If we have a situation where like a neighborhood association contacts us, we will then communicate with the contact at the neighborhood association. We don't typically sort of broadcast all of the information we gather to people that we haven't got an ongoing dialogue with.
Okay.
So.
Okay, and that was just my one comment on Cheryl's comment, if I may. My overall kind of arching comment to this and possibly the next report as well is, from what I can see after a year and a half of doing this job, is that this department is particularly opaque for residents in terms of we don't know how decisions are made, we don't know how to influence said decisions, etc. Now, I've sat down with you and I've sat down with Mr. Sims, and I know, no one, I don't feel like anything nefarious is going on. But I wonder, is there an opportunity, so let me back up. About 8 years ago, there was a concern of speeding on my street. People use it as a cut through, and so I went to the city and I said, what can we do? And this lovely gentleman in planning said, oh, we'll lay down a strip and we'll measure and blah, blah, blah. And end of the day, he came back and he said, yeah, you don't have the volume to support speed bumps. And so we said, okay, great. Thanks for investigating it for us. If residents had an opportunity or a way to say, on such and such date, I signaled to the city that I felt that my street was unsafe. And then a while later, they could come back to city staff and say, okay, I made that identification. Can I understand what happened as a result of that? And for me, it's not about meeting everyone's needs. We know we can't do that. It's about being able to share with them where their questions are in the process. And if it's really just like my street, sorry, you don't have the volume to support traffic calming measures, transparency, even when it's negative, is much easier to deal with. And I'm not suggesting the department is intentionally opaque at all. I'm just sharing, as a resident who has been on the other side, plus also sharing and conversing with a lot of residents, this seems like one of those things that if we could get it right and communicate exactly how projects are identified and why we might deviate, one project is number 2 this year, but now it's bumped down to number 4 because of, I recognize that might be completely onerous on staff, but it seems like it's a really key piece that might allow us to actually respond to people better.
I think what you've highlighted actually is something that we are working on, and that is how can we have more information available to the public more easily. When we have a conversation where somebody calls in and says, I'm concerned about this, we do our review, and then we respond and say, I'm sorry that the speed was not as high as we thought it was, or whatever the response is, whether it's sort of what's hoped for or not. It doesn't share all that that information or that sort of to the rest of the community. So we are looking at ways to try and create a way that can become more clear to everybody, and
It also, if I may, it helps us say no, which we have to say a lot of the time, right? We talk about having this huge, long city with, you know, patchwork infrastructure. We have to be able to say, we recognize that this is an issue. However, we cannot, this is your place in the queue. And this is how we determine where you are in that queue. And just that sort of ability to communicate our process, I think, would help all of us.
Okay. Good, yeah.
I know, just change your system, right? Just simple like that.
Thank you. Councillor Brown and then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have one question related to Lost Lake and then a couple questions in general, so if, permit me that, thank you. Through you to Mr. Rose. I think lots of, appreciate Councillor Hammond's and Councillor Armstrong's commentary with Lost Lake. I'm just curious, I know the residents are anxious to see something done there and curious on a potential timeline when they can expect some information, some of the results from the studies and the reports that have been done previously or are being done, and when possible they can expect the dialogue around possible measures to mitigate the speeding.
So just to be clear, the question is timeline for next steps?
And information.
Okay, so as I was saying, as we gather data for traffic observations or assessments, we typically only communicate with the people that have engaged us. So if it's one resident or one neighborhood association, that's our point of contact. So we now have quite a few, and well, we've got the neighborhood association for Lost Lake that's directly engaged us. So we are going to be communicating directly with them. And we can share the data that's been gathered to this point. It's probably, our probable next step would be to go out to them and say, based on this information, here are some options that we think are appropriate. So at this point, we need to sort of package it up and say, here are the issues, here are the probable solutions. How do you or do you not support these? And so the timeline for that, I would say, is still several weeks off. We just met with emergency services yesterday, or last week, so we still have to pull all the details of it together and package it so that we can present it. And so that would sort of be reporting the numbers and the suggested solutions to gauge community support for that.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. No, that's great, and I think the community would really benefit from knowing those timelines, just so they have proper expectations on how long it takes and that sort of thing. I have two questions in general based on the presentation. The first is, I'm curious if there's anything in our zoning bylaw or subdivision regulations that require or encourage the more traditional network form with the redundancies and all the benefits that you spoke of. And then my second question is, through the active transportation master planning process, will we be refining or redeveloping some of these criteria that are present in this report? I just note that it is 15 years old and there might be new approaches or more nimble approaches that could be implemented if they're sort of fleshed out policy-wise.
Okay, so the first question, is the traffic calming information stitched into any of our existing, road network, stitched into any of our existing policies and documents? And it is within the Transportation Master Plan and in the OCP. We talk in the Transportation Master Plan about minimizing block circumference with the intent of creating shorter pedestrian routes, but it also supports the traditional network mapping and design to have the more redundant and resilient transportation system. And the second question was the updating of, or through the active transportation plan. These aren't really comparable documents. And so I think that probably an updater of the traffic calming guidelines would be an independent task, because really the transportation master plan and the active transportation plan speak to sort of the proactive approach of creating a system that is self-regulating. However, the traffic calming guidelines are 15 years old, but just through the knowledge that we gain and the experience that we gain through implementation, engagement, and observations of other communities and other organizations and how they've evolved their application of traffic calming, we are continually looking for new and innovative ways to address the same issues. And what is probably more likely to happen is that we evolve these guidelines to be a little bit lower the thresholds for speeds and for volumes, to be less tolerant of speeding issues and more restrictive as to when we say a road is expected, like a local road is expected to have this type of volume, the tolerance for spillover or excess volume will become less as the community guides us. Because as I said, we've had situations where we've gone to the community and said, you know, it looks like you've got more volume and more speed on your road. We're thinking that speed humps or a traffic circle might be appropriate. And the community says, well, no, thank you. We're good where we are right now. So it is really that sort of balance of community feedback with technical observations. So I hope that answered your question.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Rose, I appreciated the report. And I think you just answered part of my question, or one of my questions from Councillor Brown, and that is, given the fact that this traffic calming report is 15 years old, there is no immediate plan for an upgrade, but you're acknowledging that you take into account new techniques and information that you've learned.
Yeah, there's not a formal plan to review or update at this point in time. We're more than happy to if it's suggested to us. But I think one of the really important things with it is that it's a guideline for a process. And so through that, there's always learning. So sometimes we need to turn the dial up and sometimes we need to turn it down. And we take direction from the community as to which way that should go for their particular instance.
Thank you. And if I may, Your Worship, my other question or comment goes to what other councillors have asked about, and a couple referenced a specific site. And we as councillors are often getting lobbied from members of the community about what they perceive as problem areas in their communities, and rightly so. And they, of course, see that as a priority, whereas somebody from a different neighborhood with a different problem might see that as a priority. So when I read this report on page 5 of the actual traffic calming guidelines, I was very pleased to see that there's 2 or 3 pages dealing with actual how to deal with resident requests in the administrative process. And in fact, a flow chart that shows how concerns are received, acknowledged, and responded to and tracked. So I think it's important that the public knows that we aren't dealing with each individual situation in a knee-jerk manner. They're all being tabulated, they're all being looked at, and overall priorities are being determined. So if you could just comment very briefly on that, I would appreciate it.
As in, how do we receive, process,
Yes.
et cetera? So as you said, there is a flow chart on sort of outlining a roadmap on how to receive and process. What that doesn't show is that we actually have a database in our GIS system that actually allows us to populate and document all of the calls we get, all of the emails we get, where they're located, what the concern is, any information that the caller or the emailer can give to us. And so we can actually track all of these questions so that, you know, we know where, if we have several calls or emails for one particular area, we know that there's a hotspot there. And so that enables us to incorporate that into our prioritization process for dealing with things.
Thank you. I think that is important for the public to know, and also to know that when we spend dollars on some of these calming projects, it's not based on who is complaining the loudest. It's based on what you have identified and your staff have identified as priority needs. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. First, just a comment, glad that sounds like there's attention to the situation at Lost Lake Road. My question, sort of building on what Councillor Thorpe and Hemmons brought up, is I think having that database and spreadsheet available to be seen in some format by the public, just to be able to communicate sort of what priorities lie into sort of the algorithm that helps set the prioritization, I think could be a useful communication tool to signal sort of that, you know, things are being attended to, and we have to be cognizant of the amount of demands on the city and what we're able to address at one point at a time. My question is, are we seeing, is the increase by the community for traffic calming measures been increasing over the years, or and in relation to our capacity as well? I'm just kind of curious about those trends.
I don't have I didn't pull the numbers before I came. Unfortunately, I should have. So we have, I annually pull the numbers and see what the sort of year-over-year number of requests we have, how they break down. I think I've included some of the requests in previous presentations. Generally, the trend is continuing to grow. Like, I think we had a fairly big jump 2 years ago. And speed is definitely one of our front runners. It often comes in different variations. There's speeding on my street, or I want traffic calming. We sort of separate those into different categories, but speed is definitely a concern of the community. I think that Superintendent Miller shared some pretty shocking stats the beginning of last year. I haven't heard his stats for the same time this year. I think everything's going to be a little wonky this year, but it's definitely a big concern, and we need to find ways to deal with it. So whether it's on a major road or a minor road, we have different tools, but we still need to explore ways of addressing it.
I want to make some enemies tonight and make a comment, Mr. Rosen. You talked about speed being a factor. And I was on the committee that made the recommendations to the legislature around photo radar. And I must tell you that, as you probably know, the statistics out of New Zealand, Australia, where it had been employed for a number of years, were not only impressive, they were completely compelling in terms of support for that. It was abandoned by the government in 2001 after that election, and no government's ever had the courage to bring it back since. But I must tell you, if this city was really serious about wishing to reduce speed, and I'm not saying we don't have the courage, we'd be begging the provincial government to bring back photo radar. I can just imagine the presence of a camera or two along Lost Lake Road or any other places in this community where speed is a factor. It's not politically popular terribly, but it is an incredibly effective way of ensuring that Chief Fry's people and others don't have to attend numerous accidents, and Mr. Cameron Miller's people would see less trauma and tragedy in their lives if it was employed. But I just couldn't resist saying it, because it still bothers me to this day that a decision to change good public policy has led inevitably to the deaths and injury and enormous insurance costs that have been plaguing this province for a long time. If the government ever wants to pass down to municipalities the right to put in photo radar, I want to assure the public that I will happily support it, regardless of how unpopular it is, because it is good public policy and would save a lot of the mayhem that we continue to see on our roads, because we simply cannot put enough police out there to ensure that safety is paramount and that speeding rules are observed. Having said that, it's on to Councillor Armstrong again.
Thank you. I will take issue with photo radar, because it does exist in many provinces, and the accidents are just as high, if not higher, for the simple fact it's not effective unless you get a ticket right away and you're spoken to. You get it 4 months later and it's, oh, I got to pay a ticket. So that's one of the issues. And the other issue was it was set at far too low at 11 kilometers. But my question was, it triggered when you said that you have meetings with essential services. When you're building these roads or looking at these measures, do you have a traffic analyst or reconstructionist from the police there?
Not typically, no.
Because the reason I say that is that we see, well, police see things from a different angle because they're the ones that investigate the accidents. For an example, like we're all against trees on a boulevard because it minimizes the driver's ability to see pedestrians or people running out. But so I would really like to see that because they're the ones that do all the investigations. They're the ones that are front and center on all of these before fire or ambulance or anybody, and they're the ones that have to investigate it. So I think if we're really serious about minimizing some accidents, we should be including them in some of our road designs, because sometimes it is our road designs, and we look to Uplands when we changed that, and the accidents went through the roof when the design changed. So I just throw that out as I think it would be something that would be very valuable.
One thing that we do and have been doing for the last handful or so of our major projects is actually having a ICBC road safety audit undertaken beforehand.
I'll take issue with that because they don't do the investigation. They're not the ones in the courts. And we saw in the situation down where the member lost her life, where ICBC said she was at fault, where the court said she obviously was not, because they're always going to find fault with both, because then it eliminates the payments. So huge, huge issue with that. They're not trained in accident investigation. They're not out there. That's why I don't see an RCMP officer. I see a traffic analyst or reconstructionist who gives the professional evidence in court. Or expert evidence. ICBC doesn't give expert evidence in court. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to Councillor Thorpe's earlier point about this flow chart in the traffic calming guidelines, again, I would use it just to say that this tells us how projects get into the system, but they don't tell us or residents how projects move through the system, and that's actually where the questions are coming from. And I'm a firm believer that an informed electorate makes everyone's jobs easier, so you get fewer complaints. If it's really a no, Mrs. Smith, you're not going to get speed humps, that's on us to say that, because this is a criteria we use to define our next projects, etc. So no question, just making a further point.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two things, if I may. I think it was late last year, after the summer, as a matter of fact, we got a rather detailed report from the Departure Bay Neighborhood Association regarding speeding on the Departure Bay Road next to the beach there. And in it, they had a number of what I thought were good recommendations on how to mitigate the speed limits there or lower them. And because we had put up signs, and as you said before, and as is said in the report, they don't particularly work. So can you tell me where that particular project is in the system?
It was on our radar. Things have kind of been knocked out of kilter right now. Traffic patterns are not what they were, and so it is one that we are sort of observing and waiting to see whether we're going to move forward with something more concrete this summer. Well, I think over the next couple of weeks that we'll probably see whether or not we should be moving forward with that. I was contacted by the association earlier today with the same inquiry, and so yeah, it is on our radar, but like as I said, things have changed. So.
Okay, I appreciate that. I mean, they had some good suggestions, which I didn't think were that costly. In terms of the Lost Lake Road issue, if I hear what you're saying, and there is a process that happens and communication happens, that sort of thing, what happened that we're now getting pummeled with emails from members of that community saying they're fed up? And so, I mean, like, how did that come about? I know you're not responsible for it, right? But something happened other than a deer got hit that has caused this tremendous amount of emails that we're receiving.
I can't tell you that I know what the catalyst was. So I'm not sure whether it was just that it was a topic in these reports or whether it was something else altogether, but something was clearly an instigator.
Okay, oh, all right, thanks.
I think with admiration and respect, Councillor Bonner, that I think we all wanted stronger neighborhood associations, and I'm not being cheeky when I say it. I think the Long Lake Neighborhood Association is proving that when you get organized, and I think they're doing a wonderful job of lobbying the city around the problems on Lost Lake Road. I give them full credit.
Mm-hmm.
Any further questions on this? Thank you very much. Appreciate your time tonight. The next is pedestrian infrastructure, education, planning, and prioritization. Good evening, Ms. Thomas.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Thank you for having me here tonight. This is my first time using the button, so I'll do my best. So in the Transportation Department, we have put pedestrians first for a long, long time, and it was formalized in 2014 in the Transportation Master Plan. I do like the expression, everyone is a pedestrian at some point in their day. We deliver pedestrian infrastructure through 3 streams: capital projects, small-scale projects, and developments. And like many of our assets, the citizens would like to see more than we have funding available for. Okay. The right side? Okay. There we go. So, generally speaking, our pedestrian infrastructure falls into 2 categories. It's either crossings or it's a linear feature. In Nanaimo, our pedestrian infrastructure is still growing, and we provide facilities on the basis of connectivity and safety. When we're looking at the pedestrian network, we're looking at it as a whole, and we are looking at how it connects to our other modes, our bike network, our transit system, as well as the roads. So I'm going to speak about each of them a little bit further. We use 3 different kinds of crossings in Nanaimo. We have your basic signs and lines, which is your basic pedestrian crosswalk. The next level up, we use rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which we shorten to RRFBs. And then the third device we have in our bag of tricks is a 3-color traffic signal. There are other kinds of crossings that you might see out there on different roads in other jurisdictions, but these have served our purposes to date. So here we have examples of a basic pedestrian crosswalk. We use a zebra crossing, and we have 2 kinds of signs. We have children crossing, and we have the regular adult crossing. A driver will see 2 signs on their approach to a crosswalk, one on their left and one on their right. So these signs are mounted on the road back to back. Crosswalks all over BC look the same. This is a provincial standard. Next up, we have RRFBs. And just like our crosswalks, we have signs on each side of the road, and then on top of that is the RRFB. Pedestrians walk up to the pole, they press a button, these lights flash. They're not on a timer so that the next pedestrian up can push the button and also get service immediately. With these particular devices, we have the option of hardwiring them into our power system, or they can be solar powered. In Nanaimo, we have 53 of these right now, and generally every year we install 1 or 2 depending on funding and priorities and the complexity of the installation. Okay, and last but not least, the third crossing type we use are 3-color traffic signals. Similar to the RRFB, the pedestrian comes up to the pole and pushes the button. In this case, a 3-color traffic signal has a controller. It's a computer brain that runs the signal. With the half signal, which is specifically designed for pedestrians, the side street faces a stop sign, and the main road has the 3-color signal facing the driver. The crossing, in this case, are twin parallels, not the zebra, and the drivers see a stop bar as well as the twin parallels. This is also a provincial standard, so every half signal in the province looks the same. This particular snip that I took from Google is of Gordon, and that is on the highway. So this is under the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure's jurisdiction. This particular signal is tied to the next one up the road, and so they operate in as a duo. We in the city have one half signal, and it is at 5th and Georgia. Okay, so that was our 3 types of crossings. Our linear infrastructure includes shoulders, sidewalks, and multi-use paths. These features are designed to provide walkability, and they give us different levels of comfort depending on the separation from the other modes on the road. So we use shoulders where it's part of the road. Shoulders provide road stabilization. They also give drivers a room to maneuver around objects that might be in the road, and they give a place for drivers to pull over and stop if they need to. They also provide space for pedestrians and bicycles. They are a very cost-effective way of providing space for pedestrians and bicycles if you have a lot of kilometers of road. Sidewalks are sometimes concrete and sometimes asphalt. You can see in the middle photograph, we have a bump out. The bump out allows pedestrians to move out from behind parked cars, so they're more visible to the drivers. And having a bump out at a crossing allows, shortens the crossing distance, which makes it easier for pedestrians to get across the street. In this particular photograph in the middle, this is from our Lindley Valley area, and you'll see that the sidewalk has a non-mountable curb, which is a bit more safety for the pedestrian. And the sidewalk here meanders away from the road so that the pedestrian is separated further from the moving traffic or the parked cars, and it gives us the opportunity to add some green space. The third type of linear feature that we provide are multi-use paths. They tend to use a lot of space and are difficult to retrofit in an urban environment, but they're cost-effective to provide as part of development. On to the planning. We deliver pedestrian infrastructure through 3 different streams of funding. So we have small infrastructure, we have capital plans, and we have developer contributions. In doing this part of the work, we are balancing the short, medium, and long term. So we receive complaints or requests for pedestrian infrastructure on a continuous basis throughout the year. On an annual basis, we evaluate them all, and then it dovetails into the budget financial cycle. We're constantly trying to balance the neighborhood needs of getting pedestrians or people from their homes to, say, a school or a park. We also have the bigger picture strategic plan around our mobility hubs. We could spend all of our money on the small neighborhood stuff. I say small, but it's still expensive. Or we could spend all of our money in a mobility hub or on a transit exchange. So we are looking at all these different features, short, medium, and long, and still trying to make a walkable, connected community. One of the other things we look at when we're doing pedestrian infrastructure is the underground. It isn't considered good engineering to put new construction on top of old. So one of the things we look at when we're deciding whether or not to put a crosswalk in or when it goes in, we're looking at what the underground infrastructure is doing. Is it aged, and does it need to be updated before we do the sidewalk, for instance? So as a concrete example, pardon the expression, if we have a sanitary sewer which needs to be replaced, say, in 3 years, do we delay our sidewalk and put it in 3 years when the SANI goes ahead, or do we bring the SANI project forward and do it first in the same year that we were planning the pedestrian infrastructure? And that is the most cost-effective way to spend our money. And last but not least, we try to resist putting in infrastructure where we know a developer might be coming in shortly to do it. So if we have a subdivision on one property and then a subdivision 2 properties over, we end up with a gap in the infrastructure where each of the subdivisions has built a nice sidewalk and the piece in the middle doesn't exist. We prefer not to put money into that when we know the subdivision may go ahead in the near future, and that is, we consider that to be a prudent use of our dollars. Okay, so that's the planning. We take our design guidance from a variety of sources. NACTO, Sweden, the Netherlands do amazing things with their bicycle networks. ITE and the BC Active Transportation Design Guide, which came out just this past fall. The thing about all these sources of information is that they give us guidance and philosophies. They don't give us actual measurements and details like sidewalk widths or grades or offsets. We take all of this information from all these sources and through our professional development, and we distill it down to be numbers, widths of sidewalks, distances between signalized intersections, the technical stuff. These pieces of guidance don't give us information about our community values. They don't give us information on costing, but they do tell us what the current trends are in philosophies. So, as an example, we have moved to a philosophy of all ages and abilities. In the old days, and for many, many years, sidewalks have been 1.5 meters wide because that allows two pedestrians to walk past one another shoulder to shoulder. So if you move to the philosophy of an all ages and all abilities facility, then you need to be able to provide room for two wheelchairs passing side by side. And so in our next change of our engineering standards, our sidewalks will be a minimum of 2 meters wide. So these kinds of guidances help us make those philosophical decisions, but they don't give us technical numbers. Here are our magic prioritization spreadsheets. We have two specialized spreadsheets. They are Excel. I've given you a little snip here of the crossings spreadsheet and the sidewalk spreadsheet. In real life, they have more columns and they have a lot more lines. When we receive a complaint or a request for a facility, we enter it into the spreadsheet and we evaluate a series of factors. They're very similar for both crossings and sidewalks. We look at road classification, pedestrian volumes, visibility, traffic volume and speeds, the adjacent land use, safety history, and then the distance to the next facility, whether it's a crossing or the sidewalk or linear facility. We look at all these factors, and they are a surrogate for risk. What happens is we put the next request into the spreadsheet, and a number comes out. And so the number allows us to prioritize what we think, how this next request or this next location fits compared to the ones that are already on our list. But our spreadsheets don't tell us to install or not. It's not a go, no-go system. It is a system to tell us what our priorities are. And then we have to decide if we have the funding for it, if it's going to come through some other process, if it should be delayed because of other asset renewal projects. And so this is where I think, lack of transparency comes, that was talked about earlier with Mr. Rose's presentation. Just checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. So in conclusion, we are constantly looking at our spreadsheets, but we do the full-scale thing annually to tie into the budget cycle. We deliver our projects through a variety of financial streams, and we really do try our best to combine strategic priorities with asset renewable to optimize the expenditures. And of course, our goal is a walkable neighborhood and connected communities. So that's it for me. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to take some questions, and I have a backup supporting cast to help me if you ask me a hard one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. 2 questions, Your Worship. The first one is, when we're looking at your Excel sheet, do you take into account the vulnerable user, the type of user? Like, I'm thinking in terms of when we have seniors walking in, a lot of seniors in a neighborhood, or if we have schools that don't have sidewalks, is that taken into account?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. My second question is, and I'm going to refer to one in particular, which is 7th Street, which I know the city's worked very hard to try and do, but I think it's basically almost impossible. Is there a way we can make linkages over to, let's say, 6th Street, so that people could link over and then go down a safer street? Do we look at those options as well, or?
Yes, we do. I can't speak specifically to 6th and 7th. I participated in I think council knows that we were looking at putting down some protection on 7th. Yes, we do look at that as well. That's part of the strategic viewpoint, the 50,000-foot view we try to take to make sure that the the options are there. If one route isn't going to be accessible or cost-effective to provide, what are the other options for a neighborhood?
Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So what I heard from you in regards to my earlier questions to Mr. Rose is that the system exists. We just don't yet have a way of communicating that. And I understand it's huge amounts of data and probably changes daily, but the system exists.
Through your worship, yes, Councillor, that's true. I think that, if I can speak globally, typically engineers, we don't do a good job of communicating through a communications department. And I think that's probably one of our better learnings, is that we have a communications department that could assist us with this kind of thing. We have a website which is out of date, and so that's something we would like to update. And I think those are efforts that we can put forward, especially now that we are staffing up. We will have the capacity to do those kinds of nice things.
Thank you. And I think, sorry, I'm going to leave that thought alone, but I am going to say this sentence stood out to me in your report. By world standards, Nanaimo is still relatively small and young, and the pedestrian realm is expanding to support walkability. For this reason, the majority of pedestrian facilities are provided on the basis of connectivity and safety. That makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things I often experience as a cyclist in this community is I think there's often a demand for more cycling infrastructure, but people, there's a midway point as well where there seems, personally, I feel like there's a responsibility. If you want cycling infrastructure, if you want pedestrian infrastructure, we should really be advocating for pedestrian and cycling culture in the city to exist, and not necessarily from an infrastructure, we're going to make everything pretty and easy, but actually from the people. So if there's more cyclists on the road, that's going to be an easier case to make. Or if there's more pedestrians on the road and we have more people noticing gaps on our sidewalks, that's a much easier place to argue from. And just to your earlier point about not using communications departments, you can also use us, because if we understand the system, then that allows us to communicate to residents, and we really should be in front of you on stuff like this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I appreciate the report and the information and your forthrightness in answering these questions. And I agree with some of the points that Councillor Hemmons made regarding transparency, and how the more we can improve on that in terms of communicating to the public, the better. As with the traffic calming situation, I think every neighborhood sees its own priorities in terms of sidewalks or crossings or what have you. And I think it's important that we have unbiased professional advice that takes into account a lot of factors and then prioritizes them and can justify decisions. Perhaps there's room for more communicating of that end result to council and to the public, but I think it is important for the public to know that there does exist a series of priorities for crossings and for sidewalks. It was on your second to last slide, which people can access if they go back to this presentation. So that's my rant on this one. I think it's important that, again, it's not just a knee-jerk reaction to a complaint or a concern in one neighborhood. It's part of a bigger picture. And the sentence in your presentation that stood out for me, which I jotted down, was, quote, "Citizens would like to see more than we have funding for," end quote. And I suspect I might reference that later this evening. However, I do have a very, very basic question, and I feel a bit stupid for asking it, but I'm going to anyway. Some sidewalks are concrete, some are asphalt. What determines which is which? Is it just a matter of cost? Because I'm sure there's a substantial cost differential.
Through your worship, ironically, they kind of cost the same. One is the material is cheaper, but the labor is more costly. The other, the material is expensive, but the labor is less. Part of it is constructability, what's available to us, what other projects we're doing in the neighborhood. So that's a little bit of black magic, and I don't want to tell you all my secrets.
Oh, okay, well then, that's fine. You just keep your secrets.
Mostly it's constructability.
Thank you.
Councillor Turley and then Councillor Brown, please. Councillor
Thank you, Your
Turley.
Worship. Councillor Thorpe Yes, thank you, Worship. Councillor Thorpe just asked my questions, and after the answer, I'm not going to ask again.
Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too like the Everybody's a Pedestrian. I saw a great video today of the mayor walking and it was very, very funky. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage everyone to check it out.
Now, do add, it was in support of the kidney walk. I want everyone to donate.
I just had a quick thought when we were talking, like a while ago we saw a great presentation by our IT department and it came with a great office space video. Those spreadsheets, I think it begs to be a custom application that also publishes the results onto the website. Just a thought. My question is, when it comes to capital planning with pedestrians and active modes at the highest on the pyramid, do those projects get ranked higher? So my question is, are we taking that framework to rank capital projects in accordance with that framework, or are we ranking projects that may still be a little more auto-centric? Is there a way that we take the priorities in the transportation master plan to rank capital projects higher based on those policy statements?
Through your worship, I'm a little bit too new to be able to answer that one conclusively. I have my suspicions, but I would like to defer to Mr. Rose for a little bit of backup support here. I haven't been through a capital planning process yet.
So the process and the matrices that Ms. Thomas shared are more of a comparison to each other. So one sidewalk versus another sidewalk. Mm-hmm. So I think the question was more of a question of, do we invest in a vehicle-centric project or a pedestrian-centric project? And right now I would say that if we invest in a vehicular project, the walking and biking comes with it. So when you see a project that is based on vehicles, if it's the new roundabout or the traffic signal, they may appear to be driven by the vehicles, but they are still bringing the walkability and the bikeability and the transit with them. So these prioritization or these screening tools are to just compare one to another, not to a car, or to a transit, or to a cycling facility. So I hope that answers or provide, not quite.
I was going to say, step away from the mic.
Thank you. It sort of partially answers my question. My question really is centered on, if all things were considered equal, would a pedestrian a capital project that benefits pedestrians get chosen through a ranking process that puts them first over something like an auto-centric? So maybe the framework doesn't exist where we're ranking projects that benefit pedestrians or active modes more. That's sort of my question. Does that framework even exist?
I would say we don't do projects that are vehicle-focused. So far in my experience, our capital plan is around underground utilities and perhaps asset renewal for paving. We're not currently looking at, when you ask about vehicle-focused, in my mind that is adding lanes, travel lanes to move more cars more effectively. And we're not building infrastructure like that so much anymore. If I could use Metro Drive as an example, that's being narrowed to take away a travel lane and provide space for the other modes. That's more where our mindset is and the focus of our funding and our engineering efforts. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bonner, then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff, if I may. When you were making your presentation, and thank you very much for that, I would like to say, as some of the other councillors have said, communication, I think, is key. It would be really easy if I could defend why a crosswalk or sidewalk got built here and not somewhere else. But without knowing how that decision came about, it's hard to explain to other people. This is an odd question, but when you mentioned that sidewalks have traditionally been built for two people to walk by each other, and now we're building sidewalks wider, can you make a sidewalk a foot wider just by adding to it instead of ripping the whole thing up and building a new one?
Through your worship, I would say you can. It would be expensive. It would cost a lot per square or cubic meter to do that. There's probably some structural issues with it, because generally a concrete sidewalk is a uniform piece with rebar in it and the like. So we call it scabbing on a piece of concrete. It would be fragile. It would, maybe if you put it on the back, it would be a little bit more protected, but if you put it on the roadside, it would be subject to being hit by plows and maintenance vehicles and drivers. And so theoretically, yes, I don't know how cost effective it would be.
Okay. And you may not be able to answer this question, but can you tell me how many crossings have been upgraded in the last year in Nanaimo?
Mr. Rose is signaling 3.
3. Because we're looking at least that many today in the plan. So were those, how were those paid for or put into the project? Because we have this $300,000 that we're going to be discussing tonight, and it's an annual thing we just kind of look at. So how did those 3, were they they weren't part of the 300,000 last year, how did they get into the system?
Through your worship, the three the 3 locations that went in 2019 were contributions from, I believe it was the federal government and ICBC. The pedestrian unallocated fund that you guys are discussing later went to the widening of the sidewalk on Halliburton.
Okay, yeah, I remember that. What were those upgrades that took place?
All 3 were beacons. One was at Boundary and Nightingale, one was at Jingle Pot and Labio, and the third was at Hammond Bay and Williamson.
I see, okay, thanks. And this will probably come up again later, but in terms of your spreadsheet, how do you count pedestrians? Because they don't walk on those little things that go across the road.
Currently, we use a camera, and so we'll put it out for a day, and we'll observe 3 specific times of day, so the morning, the midday, and then the afternoon. And it's not the greatest clarity, but it gives us enough information to know where people are coming from, how they're crossing, and where they're going to. And so that's how we can gather the demand for that crosswalk.
I see, okay, thank you. And I saw a button go down there. My question's done, yeah. I think Ms. Curry has a question, something to talk about cameras?
Yes, I just want, I think Mr. Sims did this to me before, but by camera, you don't mean an actual, you're recording people visually, do you? Or how are you camera recording people?
It's just to collect data.
Yes, okay, thank you.
So we're not selling the rights to candid camera, which dates me. Councillor Gesselbrock.
That show.
Thank you, Worship. Question to staff. I'm just curious about the spreadsheet. Echo the comments made by Councillor Hammond and Thorpe about improving the communication on that for sure. But just in terms of the number of community requests, is that number growing and outpacing the funding, I guess, that council is currently allocated to address upgrades, specifically around crossings? I understand linear upgrades are a lot more expensive, but I'm just curious on the demand for crossings and if it's increasing and whether the allocation of the 300,000 is appropriate to address sort of what's being asked at the moment.
So through your worship, I think it's worth adding a little bit of clarity to the overall funding process. The $300,000 is actually an unallocated fund that is it's intended to expand, enhance the pedestrian environment. As well as that, we do have, or we typically include several $100,000 worth of pedestrian upgrades through the capital plan. So that's combined can be anywhere from, you know, a couple of $100,000 to upwards of $1 million annually that we're investing in walking facilities. So the question of is demand outpacing funding? I think I can unequivocally say that there's no amount of funding that will meet the demand. So, I mean, year by year, we see more requests for sidewalk, more requests for crosswalk, more requests for traffic calming, more requests for speed enforcement, more requests for parking regulations and enforcement. So we just see more and more and more requests. And, you know, that is without a doubt one of our biggest challenges is trying to find a way to balance the desires with what we have. And so we optimize projects. We try and merge projects to cut down on overhead costs and find ways to partner them so that we can get optimized pricing from contractors. And so, you know, sometimes it sort of becomes this, we have a phrase in the office where we talk about going through the Jenga of the budget, and we start moving things around to find out how we can manipulate things to actually work within the parameters we have and achieve the greatest success, whether it's for the underground utilities or the above ground. And so I know many months ago, I brought up a slide that talked about outbuilding demand for roads. You know, you build another road, a month later, it's full of cars, and well, why don't they build another one? So we just can't keep up with how much is desired for our community right now. So.
Councillor Turley and then Councillor Hemmons again. I mean, pardon me, Councillor Bonner. Sorry, the name thing throws me off every time.
Okay, thank you. You know, you got me all confused.
It's you, yes.
Oh, no, I mean, what my question was. Yeah, you can believe maybe Councillor.
But a Councillor
Please do,
Hemmons
because I'm going to go back to
come
it.
back to you.
Mhm.
Sure. I feel like I'm making the same point, but I just want to be sure I'm articulating it really clearly. And when I hear you say that we're always going to have way more demand than we have resources, to me, that tells me we have to become really good at saying no and why not. Or not yet, and here are the reasons why, and potentially in 2 or 3 years we might reassess. So I feel like we get caught in this. We want to help everyone. We want to serve everyone. When realistically, we can't. And so if we can clearly say, we're not going to, and this is how we arrived at that decision, then I think that helps us all do a better job.
And so I think that one of the things, and as Mr. Sims mentioned, these reports and this information that you guys are going to be receiving tonight was basically the baseline of where we're at right now. As we move into the development of the active transportation plan, we're going to be having these conversations, how we prioritize, what we use, what we don't use, how we share that information, and, you know, how it's going to guide us in the future so that, you know, you guys, the community can all know which direction we're going, why we're going that way, and actually feel like they've been a part of that conversation so that they know, you know, there's only so much we can do, and sometimes it takes 2, 3, 5 years before that project gets completed. So that's a process that we're going to be going through over the next 6 to 12 months. So
That's great, and I think in many ways it's our job to communicate that demand far outstrips our ability to meet all of those demands with our resources, so it's about choices. So I don't want you guys to think that that's solely on you. I think that in many ways is a huge part of our job, is saying, no, we can't, and this is why.
Thank you, Worship. I do have a question. It wasn't the original one, and my dear mother once told me if you can't remember the question, it wasn't that important. My question is going back to the 3 crosswalks that were upgraded last year to flashing beacons. How did that decision come about? I know that ICBC and the other organizations paid for them in partnership with the City of Nanaimo. How was the decision made for specifically at those those particular areas? Because I'm looking at Jingle Pot and Labio, and I can't see a lot of people there.
I don't have the numbers on hand, but it was sort of preliminary vetted through that matrix and reviewed. So we would have captured data that would have reflected that. I don't have the full background on that one, but the one on Boundary at Nightingale is heavily used by staff for the hospital. And the one at Hammond Bay and Williamson was flagged by through our Active Route to School process at Frank Ney Elementary. So.
Thanks.
Through your worship, I can offer some information about the Jingle Pot crossing. It is proximal to transit stops, and so that was part of the impetus for that particular crossing, is that the two transit stops on the opposite sides of the roads, the crossing connected that system.
Okay, thanks.
Always interesting when we get these answers. Councillor Gussenbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Just a follow-up to my question. It's interesting to hear sort of the scale of demand for pedestrian infrastructure, and I think that it's clear information for council to consider. If there's such a large demand, then people would be interested in paying for it, and it's something that we can consider increasing funding for. And my question, I guess, is hearing, that we do spend, sometimes up towards millions of dollars to pedestrian infrastructure. Is it a specific line item in our budget, pedestrian infrastructure by itself, or is it just lumped in with the rest of transportation roads?
Through your worship, so the degree of detail that I would see would be based on project. So I don't recall actually how it gets rolled up for you guys to see, but we would see it project by project. So, I'll have to defer that question to somebody in finance.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the report. After reading it, I realized that this is very solid information for us to have to begin our process. We're not the experts, and we have to trust our staff. On the other hand, the information of understanding what we have as priorities in our city would be good information for councillors to have and to be able to share why we made that a priority or how we've come to some of our decisions. Thinking way outside of the box, and I don't know if you can answer this, but there are some times when people need sewer lines, for instance, and they arrange with the municipality, they get sewer installed, and then they're able to pay it back on their taxes. If neighborhoods were really wanting sidewalks in their neighborhood, and that neighborhood was willing to pay for that construction, has anybody ever thought of something like that? Because I've heard about that in other areas.
Through your worship, we did have what we called a community contribution program, and that's exactly what it did. I believe the last project that stemmed from that was the sidewalk on Dover Road between Applecross and Lewis, and that was 20 years ago. And I'm not sure if it was through lack of awareness or because it is quite costly. I mean, the cost of sidewalks and other infrastructure continues to rise, contract by contract. And I think that the numbers to make that go round are a lot higher than people may think. And so that is an option, or that used to be an option that was out there. We haven't utilized it for many, many years, and I think it's probably something that would be worth having a conversation about, but I'm not sure if it would get used in the future.
Yeah, and I heard, and I don't think people are aware of how expensive sidewalks are, and I don't know why, but I've got this figure out there of something like $500,000 for 1 kilometer.
Is that the same? No.
10 million, and depending on the locations, I guess.
A fairly straightforward, sidewalk, we've seen, looks like about $2,000 per linear meter.
2,000
Per linear meter,
per lineal meter.
Yeah.
Very expensive.
exceptional, yeah. It's-
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I remembered it, and I want to thank Councillor Martman for reminding me of it. And it was the question of priorities. I understand where staff's coming from, and you've quite explained it tonight quite well. How does council fit in this whole decision-making process of how do we set these priorities as part of that? Engineers will make us the sidewalks, but how does council enter into setting the priorities on a year-to-year basis, or quarter, every 5 years, that sort of thing?
I think that, so the question you have is like a specific location or a criteria to use to prioritize across the city? Because I think those are sort of the two sides of the street that we play on.
To me, it may be along the lines of we as a city or as a council want to have more flashing beacons on streets, and we want to lower the threshold of warrants so that we are building more of them. Things along those lines.
Okay, so I think that goes into the conversation that we're envisioning having over this next 6 to 12 months with the active transportation plan, and that's where we have the conversation about what do we think are the most valuable features to enhance the pedestrian realm in our city. And we have that discussion of, okay, we think that beacons or in-road signs or half signals or something else altogether. I mean, if you go to the UK, there's the whole gamut of birds. There's toucans and pelicans and all sorts of animals. and so that's a conversation that we need to have then. And so we can then bring an independent body in to say, okay, here's a consulting firm that's identified a variety or a toolkit of things that we can use. And we now get some feedback from you guys and from the community and say, this is the toolkit we have. These are the benefits of each of these. These are the costs for each of these. And this is why we think these are appropriate for this, within this toolkit. And so if you guys, that's when you guys would be part of that conversation. And so that's when you can sort of turn the dials and increase our ability to put more infrastructure out there. I think it's really important to understand that each device has its pros and cons, and I think that every situation has its appropriateness, and we can't just assume that a beacon is going to be the solution for everything. There's a lot of devices out there, and sometimes one is more appropriate than the other, and it's all about using the right tool for the right job. And so going through and building this toolkit is what will help us determine which one's which and how much we can do of each.
Councillor Armstrong.
Just, Your Worship, I'm just thinking this could be a really good topic for a GPC where we could really dive into it further. Thank you.
Take a walk on Mr. Rosen's sidewalk with Ms. Thomas's guidance. We're done with this topic. Thank you very much. The next is allocation of unallocated pedestrian funds.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Mr. Sims.
So we've built this up to this crescendo now of we have this annual amount that's at council's discretion for how it wishes to expend this line item in the budget. So staff have placed before you a report recommending several positions or several potential options. In the past, this has only been used twice or three times. In the past, we've used it to build linear infrastructure, like the sidewalk on Dufferin as an example. So staff has floated a number of options for council's consideration on those sidewalks. There's also a listing of intersection upgrades that for council's consideration as well. And the staff recommendation goes to applying this funding to the intersection upgrades, as this is more of a safety enhancement than the linear infrastructure. However, you know, there's pros and cons to each, and it's totally in council's discretion. There's also a couple of options that the funding, decision on the funding be deferred or applied to other uses within the budget for 2020. So, of course, Mr. Rose is here to answer any questions you may have, or I can support that as well.
Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Martman.
Thank you, Your Worship. I personally think I would like to see a matrix done where we know exactly where each project sits based on criteria that's set out by engineering department as well as council, whether it be vulnerable populations, whatever. So it also takes the political out of it, which has always been a concern for me, that whoever lobbies most gets it done. It may not be the best place, but it's the lobby group. So I would like to see a proper matrix done where we get it back to us saying that this intersect or whatever scores 89, this one scores 84. So then it gives us some context as to why we should be moving in each direction. And then at the end of the day, if we decide, well, we're still going to go with 82, then we're the ones that wear it. But I think it's really important that there be some type of matrix. I do think it would help take the political part out of it and put us down to solid, hard-based facts based on the criteria developed. So for me, I would actually like to defer it till after we get more information. I would like to see it all go to a GPC where we can really dig deep as to what this council sees as criteria. Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I like the staff's recommendation of the intersection upgrades because it seems like you get the most value for your money spreading it throughout the city and making the intersections. But I am very concerned, especially around the Departure Bay Road and children walking to school in Departure Bay. If we were to make the decision, or maybe we'll make the decision to defer it and get more information, but if we were to make the decision to approve the intersection upgrades, what would we be looking at for a timeline for eventually some type of sidewalk around that Departure Bay Road and the school?
Through your worship, that is there's two scenarios for that. One would be that if this option is in the financial plan for next year, it could be discussed again at that point in time. There's also an option for it to, for us to, I believe it's in the 4th or 5th year of the capital plan right now. So this was really an advancement.
Okay.
And so we have also been in conversations with a scenario where we try and develop a bit of an interim facility there, possibly with some bollards or some delineators of some description, kind of like what we've applied down on Port Drive.
Okay.
And so that would be a bit of a bridging facility. So to take us from now until we can actually build a complete sidewalk.
Thank you. And if I may, and this is 300,000 unallocated funds, but do we have to make a decision for a timeline now because of the budget coming up? Because that's my wondering, if we delay our decision making, what do we do to this 300,000?
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is exactly at council's discretion. If there's no urgency to make the decision, it's just that it helps us get on with the projects in this budget year. If council chooses to allocate the funding for another use, then that's entirely council's discretion. This is general revenue funded, and Ms. Lakin will be bringing forward a report a little bit later about options for taxation. So it may figure into your decision making there.
Okay, thank you.
I would just remind council that if we proceeded with approving it for sidewalks, the Departure Bay, Allen-a-Dale Place to Wardropper Park would take up the whole 300,000.
Yeah.
If we allocate intersection upgrades, we upgrade 5 intersections in total. Councillor Hemmons and then Councillor Brown.
Bishop, like Councillor Armstrong, I would have preferred to have seen not just what we're thinking we can do, but what didn't make the list and why, so we can kind of see what are we deciding on. With that said, I'm in support of staff's recommendation from the safety perspective, recognizing that sidewalks, of course, we want more, particularly where kids are involved, but that we seem to just get more bang for our buck doing intersections, and it keeps people, that's the dangerous part of the road, right? A confirmation, if I could, I believe in Ms. Thompson's report that seniors and children are accounted for in the priority assessment. So when we're saying this project over that project, we're accounting for who the road users are in that. Okay, thank you, I'm seeing a nod. And I also wanted to say, I think the front street at Port Drive this will be amazing, and it will help tie together, hopefully, the new transit exchange and Front Street Extension, and I think that's really exciting. There's a lot of people dashing across that road all the time.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to move the staff recommendation and welcome future conversations around increasing funding for pedestrian infrastructure.
Seconded, Councillor Gesselbrock. Discussion on the motion. Pardon me, Councillor Thorpe.
I was actually going to move the recommendation as well, but I will speak very briefly to it for the reasons that have been expressed. I think our money goes a lot further with these 5 intersection upgrades. It is a safety concern, and no, enough said. So I'll support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I haven't forgotten about the petition, but we've moved to the motion, and everyone's had a chance to look at the petition as well. I know that's a consideration. Any further discussion? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. Not that I'm trying to nitpick, but I'm just trying to figure out process of how we got here. I have a question regarding Waddington Road. And there's, I'm curious of how we came to that decision of putting a new crosswalk, because there's no crosswalk there now. And when there's 2 crosswalks on either block on the other side.
So it's actually, there actually is a crosswalk there.
There is?
Now.
It doesn't show on your GIS map.
It's the other side of St. George Crescent. So it's actually a connection to a trailway off of Girvan.
Okay.
Which crosses to the housing facility there, which crosses into the park and the backside of the old Dufferin School.
Okay, because I was looking on the maps earlier today, our GIS maps, and it only shows 2 crosswalks, which are on Waddington, but are about a block and a half from St. George.
There's one at Dufferin, and then there's a second one, which is the one we're talking about, which is on the southerly portion of St. George Crescent.
Oh, so it's not actually on where St. George hits Waddington, it's farther down?
Yeah.
Oh, so it's that one?
Yeah.
Okay, that one makes sense, because I was reading it as being at the intersection there.
Nope.
There's no crosswalk there now. Hammond Bay and Nottingham Drive, I can sort of see that. It's a fairly lengthy road, people probably going fast there. We also unfortunately had a pedestrian struck farther north on Hammond Bay just late last year, I think. And that was at a crosswalk as well, which isn't this one. Why is that one not on the list?
That one is still with the RCMP right now.
Okay, thank you. And my other question was Front Street. I agree, having used that exchange for a fair amount and watching people take their lives and their risk as they walk across. We're also, though, going to be building a brand-new exchange there. Is this part of the design of the new exchange, or are we going to rip it up when it's all done?
So we have located the exchange there, and we're working on the details of the design right now. We do not have anything in our capital plan to construct anything right now, but we have a demand. And so we have people crossing there to get to and from the transit facility. So this is something that needs to be viewed in concert with all of what may come about, but it's not there's nothing in the financial plan right now for physical changes for that transit exchange at this point in time.
So, but in theory, we could, money could come available for from wherever, and we do build a nice transit exchange there, and this may not end up in the design. I'm just asking if that's a possibility. I don't mind spending the money.
Just about anything is a possibility, but I think that this is going to be viewed as something that will become, as much as possible, a permanent feature there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I want to acknowledge the receipt of a petition respecting the installation of a rectangular rapid flashing beacon at Bruce and Albion Crosswalk, signed by 135 people. Obviously, Council is concerned about the injuries received by the young woman that prompted this petition. But having said that, given that this matter is the subject of an existing legal claim, I'm afraid we can't comment further on it. The next item is the 2020-2024 financial plan options. Ms. Gurry, I'm missing something, am I?
No, you're not missing anything, Your Worship. I was just thinking there is a scheduled recess at 9. Perhaps council wishes to take a break now prior to getting into the next
Ms. Gurry,
subject.
your interventions are always timely, thoughtful, and appropriate. I think that's a very good idea.
Welcome to the city's South Fork Water Treatment Plant. This is where we take water that we would collect in our lakes and rivers, pipe it, we filter it and treat it before we send it off to the city's distribution system in your taps. This facility actually does a better job than most home filtration systems. The water that comes into your home that you use every day, that you bathe in every day, that you wash your clothes in every day, is cleaner than anything you can get anywhere.
Here you see filtration in action. It's kind of like watching paint dry. There's nothing to really see. But if you look in the tank, you'll see the froth on the top. That's dissolved organic matter, and when we aerate the tank, that froths up, and that's why that's up there.
We take all the little particles, all the organic matter, any insects or bugs that might be in the water, and pathogens that we're trying to filter out, they're all gone. We filter the water using a series of membranes.
So what we're looking at here is a membrane filtration module. So when I talk about the membranes filtering the water, this is what we're filtering the water with. And while you might think that the water flows through like the baleen of a whale, it's not true. These are hollow fiber membranes. So each of these little tiny strands are hollow, just like a shoelace. And the membrane is wrapped around the outside of these tiny little hollow fibers. So these sit in a bath of water, raw water, and then we pull the water through the wall of the straw or the shoelace, and then it travels along and it collects in this vessel at the end here. And this hole at the end is where we pull the water out.
And the membranes are like an almost impermeable waterproof layer that we pull the water through. So now we're just left with clean, pure drinking water. Take care.
Thank you very much. We're going to reconvene now, everyone. The next item, as I indicated earlier, will be the 2020-2024 financial plan options. Ms. Legan, our General Manager of Corporate Services, leading us to a very difficult part of our decision-making process this year.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I plan to speak briefly about the 2024 financial plan options, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mercer. The decisions taken by Council since the provisional budget was adopted January 13th of this year, as well as our finalized numbers, have resulted in a lower than originally budgeted tax increase of 5.2% to 4.5%. The options presented in the staff report before you are consistent with the measured approach to the current uncertainty surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic and the uncertainty about its persistence. Measures within the city's purview for rapid economic recovery include the decisions taken to date concerning due dates, deferrals, deferred penalties for late payments, and other measures to provide relief to Nanaimo's citizens. The critical and important capital program supported by the financial plan, as well as continued stewardship of important city assets, is required to contribute to the strongest position for rapid economic recovery. Also, I just want to point out that looking forward to 2021, the projected tax rates included in the report are placeholders. They're based on current assumptions, and they're a starting point for future 2021 deliberations. That being said, option 2, for example, provides a lower 2020 tax rate than the 4.5 in the provisional at 3.8%. That could be accomplished by allocating $830,000 from the Special Initiatives Reserve. That option would then preserve from the reserve $2 million for future measured relief or investment as this COVID-19 situation persists. So with that opening, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Ms. Leggin. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. What I'm going to do is I'll go through the three options that are presented in the report, as well as what they were presented to you last week, and just go through the pros and cons of each one of them. Like Ms. Leggin just said, keep in mind that 2021 to 2024 tax increases are just a starting point, and they could go up or down depending on how the economy goes or what decisions council makes. So those are just a starting point based on what we know today. So option 1 is the budget as is. So since adoption, the budget has been updated to reflect changes in estimates and directives from council. So these changes have brought us to the current projected increase of 4.5%, 1% for asset management, and 3.5% for general property tax increase. And this brings the property tax increase for a typical Nanaimo house to $95 per year. And the advantage of this are due to the economic uncertainty at this time, and we don't know what the impact on 2021 will be. This gives the lowest starting point tax increase for 2021 of the three options. And it leaves the full 2.9 million that we put in there from surplus, the 2019 surplus, to fund any shortfalls we may have from the COVID-19 pandemic. The disadvantage of this one is that it doesn't provide any additional financial relief to residents during the economic crisis we're in. So option 2 is a smoothing of the property tax increase between 2020 and 2021. And in this option, we use $830,000 from the 2019 surplus to reduce the 2020 property tax increase to 3.8. So this will bring the property tax increase on a typical house in Nanaimo to $79 per year. And again, the 3.8 is the starting point for 2021. And we've assumed a normal year, as we don't know what's going to happen in 2021 at this point.
Ms. Mercer, Councillor Armstrong.
I do have a question, because I don't understand that, because when you look at the total, it's $29.67 for option 1, and if you look at option 2, it's the same amount, $29.67. So how does that change that? Or 2019, yeah, sorry. They're the exact same figures. It doesn't matter which option we look at.
Yes. So for 2019, the property, that is, what we've done is the increase, the market change in on an average typical house in Nanaimo has gone up 1.7%. So our starting point, so to calculate out what a typical house would be in value in Nanaimo.
I get that, but why is option 1 and option 2 the exact same amount if we're going to throw in $800,000? So why is this the property tax amount the exact same? I'm looking at 2019, they're both the exact same. Yeah. Yeah, but we're supposed to be giving $800,000 in option 2 to bring it down.
So, through your worship, if you look, Councillor Armstrong, if you look, so 2019 is the house value, and the taxes on that house value are the same, because that's our starting point. So we've assumed a 1.5 or 1.7% increase in value. So our house value, our typical house value for all three options is $527,145. And from that, we base so in option 2, it's a 3.5 or 3.8% increase in taxes over last year. So it's 2019 will always be the same, because that's our starting point. And when we calculate the 2020, depending on what option you go with, that'll change the amount owing for 2020. But we always have the benchmark of 2019.
I think I get it now. Thank you.
So the advantages of the smoothing of the property taxes. Okay, you're good. It provides some financial relief to residents during this time, and the allocation still leaves us about $2.1 million to alleviate any losses we may have from the COVID-19 pandemic. The disadvantages are it does increase our starting point for 2021, and because when you take from reserves, it's a one-time funding source, so we have to make it up in the next year. And again, due to the uncertainty around this whole pandemic, we don't really know completely how 2020 is going to be affected by in our budget. Option 3 assumes that we only fund the 1% asset management reserve contribution. And that's just a 1% that will go into the general asset management reserve and no other increase. So in this option, we used all of the $2.9 million from the 2019 surplus and about $825,000 from the general financial stability reserve to reduce the 2020 property taxes down to 1%. And this amount that's taken from the general financial stability reserve will need to be repaid. And we have incorporated a 4-year payback into the future year tax increases. So the advantages, this will bring the property tax increase on a typical house to $21 for the year. $21 increase over last year. So this provides additional support, financial support to residents. But the disadvantage is it really increases the starting point for 2021 to 6.8%. And again, because of the uncertainty, that number could go up depending on what kind of economic impact the city has. And due to uncertainty around how quickly the economy may recover, this may put upward pressure on the property taxes for 2021. So those are the 3 options that staff have presented to you. You can discuss the merits or ask us questions about options.
Before I go to questions, I want to remind Council that this is a very difficult decision to make. There's a whole range of views on this, I think, that another meeting between now and next Monday. And I think that is certainly something to keep in the back of your mind if we find that we are not reaching some fairly firm consensus on this. I would much rather see a council that is generally satisfied with what we conclude as a group as opposed to a 5-4 split or something like that, because we are facing the most unusual times. I don't think any of us signed on to preside over council, as Councillor Hemmons reminded me the other day, during the middle of an economic crisis felt around the globe in a pandemic. So the politics of this are problematic. Everyone will be looking at the percentage regardless of what the actual impact is. And the impact, candidly, is fairly modest with respect to an increase on the average home, which is assessed at over $500,000. I never thought I'd be saying that as just an average home in Nanaimo, but that's what the numbers tell us. But at the same time, many people are suffering and are expecting the city council and the city to tighten its belt. And I just want to say to all those who use that language, it's not that we're tightening our belts, it's your belts. It's the services that this city delivers to each and every person living within its boundaries, whether they be renting and paying taxes, property taxes indirectly through their rent to their landlord, or whether they be homeowners or whoever they may be. If we decide on a smaller option, if you will, or a different option, there are consequences to it. Many of us and many of you will argue that we have to take into consideration that surely the rainy day that's come is what we've been setting aside this money for, but that is a consideration. In any event, I already have Councillors Bonner, Armstrong, and Councillor Turley on the line in terms of questions, so let's go to Councillor Bonner first.
Thank you, Your Worship. And first off, I would like to thank Ms. Mercer and all of your staff. I asked a bunch of weird questions about this thing, and you came through with really great answers that really helped me come to some sort of decision here. So I want to thank you for that. I have a couple of questions, and it's regarding what's right now the key budget drivers in the budget as it sits now. There's two items in there. One is economic development, which I understand to be hiring of staff in the event that we go that route of building an economic development entity in this town. And the other one is the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve amount of $480,000. Do we know for sure that the work that we're going to be doing on economic development will be actually completed and someone hired this year? Because if we're not, I could see that coming out of the budget with the idea if we're not going to use the money, we shouldn't tax on it. And then what is the reason for the $480,000 for the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve?
Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. I think there were sort of two parts to what was in the budget, I recall, from the Economic Development Function. One being the addition of a new manager, and I do not expect that we'll see, in the context of where we're in with the pandemic, that we proceed with that position this year. We'll probably defer that to 2021. The second, the larger component, was some money that was put in there to allow for the initial stages of whatever this external agency is. So the idea was that the committee was, task force, was carrying on with their work, that there'd be some decisions made in the first, Q2 of, maybe Q1, Q2 more likely of this year was the original thought. And then moving out into the end of 2020, there'd actually be some seed money to start that external organization, whether that be securing space, starting with the initial staff, so they could get up and running prior to 2021. As you know, the task force councils asked that the task force reconvene. That'll be happening relatively soon, and we'll allow that committee to finish their work and make some recommendations. There has been a small portion of that money that's been spent on those consulting fees, but there is a portion that remains available, and it would really be up to council whether you wanted to hold that money aside in case you did want to start to action any of those recommendations coming up, or make that decision now. But I don't have a date for you as of when that work will be finally completed and returned to council.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. Do we remember why that money was going in there?
I'm just struggling to see where that is on the budget drivers.
Ms. Fuller is coming to assist. Ms. Fuller.
Through your worship to Councillor Bonner, you are looking at the budget driver from the draft budget. Prior to adoption of provisional budget, council agreed to cap the contribution at 67% for casino revenue and 100% of the Fortis revenue. So the budget driver dropped down to $75,000 and is now included in other in the presentation that we did on the 20th.
So that one's not in there anymore then?
It's not a 480, no.
Okay, right, thanks for that. And so I'll just say what I'm quite in favor, may I do at this time, of option 2, but the changes I would like to see is I would like to see the general asset management reserve 1% moved to 2023. It's already been conversations already had that it looks like that 1% may continue on for an indefinite period of time after that, or a recommendation may come to council on that, which I would support. And according to the information that I received from finance, if we did that and then carried on, we would only be short about $60,000 or so if we carried on with 1% in addition to 23 and then in 24, that sort of thing. If we look at the economic development money of $466,000 and we take that out of the budget, that drops our budget down to approximately our budget increase down to 2.4%. If we take out the 1% asset management, then that would mean our budget increase for this year tax-wise would be 2.4%. And I'm quite in favor of that option.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually in favor of number 1. I think next year is going to be the very difficult year. This year we've been given reprieves, especially business from the federal government, which will help, which may not be there next year. So I think next year people are going to be even bigger trouble than this year. So I think most people, we didn't go into restrictions until March, so most people pay monthly, I believe, into their mortgage fund or whatever. So I don't think it's going to have as big a hit this year as it will next year. And I think next year is when we're going to have to really look at it. I'm never in favor of not doing asset management. I think that's one of the reasons our city's in such great financial spot, is because we have been doing that regularly and we're able to fix things on a regular basis, such as what happened on Bowen Road. So I will not support number 2, but I would support number 1. Thank you.
And Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have 2 questions. And then at some point in time, I'd like to make a motion, but I can wait on that. The first question is the MOESS version 13, which prior to all this COVID stuff, we were going to have a GPC on it with people making presentations. That, of course, is being delayed. And my question is, if we delay that until next year, 2021, is there going to be any cost savings in the operations based on that?
Sorry, I missed what?
Mr. Sims.
Probably.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Councillor Turley's question, I don't believe there'd be any cost savings. This would be, there may be some cost savings in the community development as it goes forward, but it'll come to us anyways. Any time we increase the standards, any time the building inspection or the building code increases, there's an increase in cost. But the flip side is a lot of the changes in the standards contribute directly to improved asset management. So our roads fail prematurely. If we can make those more robust, we'll extend the life. So it's really ends up being a longer term investment in, so the cost is less down the road than immediately, if that helps.
Yeah, that does. Thank you, Mr. Sims. If I can ask a second question, I believe it's probably in your department too, Mr. Sims. So given the fact that I see in our neighborhood anyway, quite frequently during November, December, through to probably about this time of the year, the compost bins going out, the percentage of them on the day that they're to be collected, which is every week, is not consistent. And so I'm wondering if there's been any data on kind of the percentage that the compost bins are filled to capacity during that time frame. And if they're not, has any thought been given to perhaps just doing every second week for those particular bins? I know it wouldn't probably save any staff time, but I'm thinking more in terms of wear and tear on the equipment.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that's an interesting question, and I'm going to take a stab at an approximate number, and this is, I'm just kind of going by my memory, which isn't always trustworthy, but it's about 80% in the wintertime is the green bin utilization. The flip side is that now during this period of self-isolation, we're nearly at 100%. So we're really pushing our equipment hard. So just because you have a green bin doesn't mean you have to put it out, and the less frequency, the less cost. So the biggest cost driver is in the tipping fees. So the less we can tip, the more we would save. So I'm not sure if that helps, Mr. Turley, Councillor Turley.
Yeah, no, I understand. I was surprised the usage is 80% during the wintertime, but that's probably good news. So. Thank you.
Councillor Martman and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Since we're kind of talking about different options here, I was looking at option 2, just as some people have said, tightening the belt. I first of all want to address a phone call we received from a person, a citizen, and I'm sure there's other citizens that are thinking the same way. And he said really he thought there should be a 0% increase, and in fact, maybe even less. I don't know how you go negative, but maybe you pay back. And he thought because the services in the city is not providing any services. And I thought to myself, well, you see, here's the thing. We are providing services. We're providing police and fire and garbage service and water and sewer and staff that are here to help and bylaws and permits. So actually, the only services we actually have cut are the ones that brought us in revenue. So our aquatic center and our recreation centers and things like that. So unfortunately, we cannot cut the taxes because you wouldn't have any services. Looking at the different options, and I like the idea of trying to tighten up a little bit and save, but the difference between option number 1 and option number 2, when you get down to hard dollars, is $16. It's just over $1 a month you would save. I would much rather, and I believe most people probably about to pay their property taxes through the monthly payment, et cetera, or have deferred them. I would feel really responsible if we stuck to the budget and option number 1, which we can afford for this year, because we are not certain what next year brings, and it might be next year where we go, oh, we do have to take that 1% and defer it, or we do have to do something differently. But right now, we're operating the city, we're operating it really well, we're keeping our lights on, we're doing everything the way we're supposed to do it, and I would like to see us just stick with option 1 and realize that we're doing our best, and going forward, it might be next year we have to really tighten our belt. Thank you.
Councillor Brown and then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Spent a lot of time in the budget the last 2 weeks, and I keep coming to 3 conclusions. There really is no easy decisions, and we were pretty tight on the first go through of trying to reduce some of the impacts, because if we recall, we started much higher. I also think the future is truly unknown. Like, all the modeling is all over the place, but I think the reality is it's at least a couple years getting through this. And the third item, I think, is that there's a strong desire at this table and in the community to really come out of this thing swinging. I agree with a lot of the comments that have been said, and if it's permitted, I would actually like to move recommendation number 1 and get it on the table for discussion.
Seconded by Councillor Gesselbrock. Councillor Thorpe.
So there's a motion on the table now, Your
Yes.
Worship, for option number 1?
Option 1.
Thank you. I will speak to that. I was going to wait until a motion was made to speak, but I'll tell you now how I feel, and that is that I will absolutely support this option. And that is to maintain our provisional budget as we have proposed, I've given this a lot of thought, as all of council have, and I know that. And I think that we spent a lot of time coming to this provisional budget. We took a lot of time and care to come to this prior to the whole COVID situation, and this council decided that all of the items on the provisional budget we felt were worthwhile and needed for the good of the city. And I personally will not support any amendment or change that impacts next year's budget, and I think you've alluded to that, Your Worship, as well. Basically, this past year has been strong for the city, except for the past month and a half, when the pandemic struck. People knew that this budget was coming, and we actually, I think it's fair to say, had fairly little pushback on it. Now, things have changed due to the pandemic, but also we know that senior government relief is being announced every day. We've delayed tax payment penalties. Commercial owners have already been told they're getting a significant 25% relief with the deferral of school tax portion of the billings. Many residential owners have their mortgages through, or their payments rather, through mortgages, which will help smooth that out for them. The cost is $95 for the average household per year. And I don't think that is outrageous for the services that the city provides. City tax revenue, as Councillor Martman, I think really well put very well just a minute ago, we use that to provide all of the services that we keep hearing that people want. They want more sidewalks. They want better, safer crossings. They want more snow removal. They want maintenance on our parks and trailways. They want recreational facilities. Sure, we all do. That's what our tax revenue helps pay for. Also, tax revenue is used for capital projects, which puts people to work and keeps people working in this community, and I think that's what we're going to need in the coming year as we try and re-stimulate the economy. So keep our workers working, provide employment. Lowering city taxes, tax revenues really hurts everybody in the long term. So I don't want to compromise a starting point for next year when I think we might be in a worse situation, because then we might find it's very difficult to provide these services that people want. So I won't belabor it, because I sense more, what's the word? Not unanimity, but more agreement, consensus, thank you, Your Worship, on council than I might have expected for this. If I need to argue some more, I will, but I'll support option one. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gurry?
Councillor Turley wishes to speak.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would like to make an amendment to motion number 1, and that is that we delay the Front Street bike lane project to a future fiscal year to reduce the 1% GAMR to, and the staff was going to provide me what the percentage would be, but I'm guessing it's around 5%, but they can correct the motion based on that. And if I get a seconder, I have some comments.
It's been seconded by Councillor Armstrong to get it on the table. Councillor Turley, I'll let you continue to explain your...
Yes. So one of the reasons that we first of all don't yet know if we're going to be getting the $200,000 grant. I just found that out today. It's possible we'll get it, it's possible or not. So the amount of money that we thought it would, it may not be that. So the second reason that is it would put us closer in time to when the underground infrastructure would need to be upgraded. And quite frankly, we've heard today, and I'm a strong believer in that upgrading all infrastructure at the same time is the most cost-effective way. And the third reason is I also don't know what the Nanaimo Port Authority plans are for the boat basin, as there may be an opportunity to include a bike lane along the waterfront walkway when they come to that decision. So in my opinion, the motion to do it this coming year is premature. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmens.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nope. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll not be in favor of this amendment. One of the reasons is my understanding that if we take this out, it doesn't affect the budget at all. because this money is actually coming from other reserves. So unless Councillor Turley wants to tell us where he's going to take that money out of the reserve and stick it in somewhere else, it doesn't really make sense. The budget will not change 1% or any percentage. So I don't, it's money that's already been allocated for this, and the fact that we could almost get half of it paid for with the grant, I think we should just continue on with the project. And it will put people to work, which is what we need to do. Thank you.
Ms. Mercer, I wonder if you could offer some sage comment on Councillor Turley.
Yes, so through your worship, Councillor Bonner is correct in that that project is funded mainly from the Community Works Fund, which doesn't affect a tax increase. Having said that, if that was removed and we looked at seeing what other projects that are currently in general revenue funding to see if they qualify to be funded from the Community Works Fund, we may be able to affect the tax increase, but at this point it's really unlikely because Ms. Fulla, in her review of all the projects, makes sure or goes through it quite thoroughly and to see which projects can be funded out of there. So we're fairly certain that it won't affect the tax return, or the tax increase. Yeah.
And it's fair to say that in terms of our capital plan, the hope was to proceed with this year, but candidly, we may receive recommendations from staff in the next few months, depending on how things play out, that might change the speed or the prioritization of capital expenditures. Is that, am I off base when I say that? I'm not seeing anyone disagree with me. Ms. Gurry, Councillor.
Yes, I'm not sure if he wishes to speak again or if he just hasn't put his hand down, so.
Councillor Turley, do you wish to speak again?
No, not on that. No.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further discussion, Councillor Armstrong? If there's no further discussion, the motion is to amend option 1 to include a removal of the Front Street bike proposal. Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just before you call the vote, I want to indicate that I thought Councillor Turley's suggestion was worth listening to, and I was interested in the staff response. And based on that staff response, I now don't think I will be able to support that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. And for what it's worth, Councillor Thorpe and all of Council, and Councillor Turley, I think given what I've heard from staff, I couldn't support that motion either. So all those in favor of the motion?
Of the amendment?
Of the amendment, rather? Councillor Turley, you're in favor of your own amendment?
Yes, he is.
Yes? Councillor Armstrong supporting you? All those opposed? It is defeated.
Call the question?
The question is option 1, and I'm sensing how this vote may go, and I want to remind everyone who's listening, we are talking of the 3 options that with which Council was presented, which are all one extreme to the other. The difference in property taxation, which is not the same as our water and sewer fees, which are going to go up accordingly, and no one's suggesting we fiddle with those. The difference between the 1% increase, which is option 3, which is just no general property tax increase, but is only the general asset management reserve of 1%, which was wisely established by previous councils. The total difference in taxation on the average house in Nanaimo is between $95 and $70, unless I'm mistaken. Is that correct, Ms. Mercer?
Between option 2, it's
Yes.
$80 or $79 for option 2.
79, 95 is what we're
right.
voting on. It's 79 for option 2 and 70,
And
21, pardon me, $21, yes, sorry, $21. So we're talking about the difference of $123. 70, yes, sorry.
74.
You know, you can tell I had a tough weekend, I guess. All those in favor? Oops, Councillor Bonner, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be voting against option one, and for the reasons I outlined earlier. And as a city, you know, we're expected to show an example and everything else. The person that cuts my hair, very nice person, her income went to zero the day after the pandemic the emergency was declared. And we have the option of saying, how are we going to affect our income? And to say, and because we have the ability, literally, we set the tax rate, we set our own income. We're not setting an example here by just going with a 4.5% tax increase. I think that we, as everyone else, should look at how are we going to get through this? And most of us who are having troubles or have lost their job are using up their reserves, what they had in the bank, if they had any. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to do roughly the same thing. We're looking at, in option two, $800,000 and change. And if we wanted to, figure out things in 2021, we could maybe shave $300,000 off and then ease it into that way. So I think it's not a question of if it's $78 or is it $43. It's a question of, are we going to be with our fellow citizens and take a hit like they are? And I think that's important here. It's not a question of, you know, it's only $80. To me, it's much more important than that, is setting an example of, we're all in this together, we're all going to take a hit together. And that's why I think my idea is better than your guys' idea. So, no
Thank you,
offense.
Councillor Bonner. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm in support of the motion, and I just want to state very clearly that the primary reason I'm in support of the motion is that every economist or anyone with an economical background right now is saying that 2 to 5 years is what we're looking at for a recovery. And with that said, next year, I think for your barber or the lady who cuts your hair, she may have been off work for 6 months at that point, or 8 months. And so I think the economic reality of what we're in right now, we're actually not going to feel the true repercussions of until at least next year. So for me, it's about keeping the 2021 increase low. And I can tell you, as a fairly newbie counselor, I came in looking at those projections of 2022, 2023 as, oh great, we're only looking at 1.9, but those are our starting numbers and they always go up. And so I'm counting on next year's also going up, and so using my vote to ensure that we're keeping it as low as possible to start with.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. In response to Councillor Bonner, and the reason why I'm supporting option one the way it is I don't believe the $16 difference, and that's basically what it is between 1 and 2. I don't think that's the right message to send when we say, we will understand that the day after, I have a friend who's at a hair salon as well, closed down, not making $1. But I'm more worried about next year, because this is property taxes collected on June 2019 to 2020. The pandemic started in March. For those people who have been paying their monthly property tax bill with their mortgages, it's all fine. It's the people that might not be able to pay their mortgage next year, or the people that might not, or what we're going to lose in revenue next year. Right now, we're fine. We need to stay the course and be fiscally prudent and be prepared to start looking at what we might have to do next year, which might be even worse. So I'm all for staying the course right now. I believe that is fiscally prudent.
Sorry, I hit you too fast, Councillor Martman. I mean, Councillor Armstrong, so.
That's okay. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Martman. I think this is the time that we have to go ahead with the increase, and I agree, $16, it works out just a little over $1 a month. Most people can afford that still, and next year going to be problematic. And the other thing I'm hoping for is that we may find next year that we do get some federal supports, so we hopefully will be in a better shape next year. And now's the time, I think, to do it in case we aren't. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just trying to find some figures provided by our finance department, but I don't see them in front of me. But basically, reserve funding is one-time funding, and it has to be replaced, and the cost to replace it in future is going to be more.
Through your worship, yes. If we took money from the General Financial Stability Reserve, yes, that per our reserve, for a reserve policy, I'm sorry, it's getting late. Per our reserve policy, we have to pay that back because we have to keep a minimum balance in that particular reserve. And many of the other reserves have minimum balances as well. So we have to keep that in mind too, that we need to keep those have sufficient funds in them to fund all the things that the city wants to fund.
Rightly, right. Thank you very much. So that just confirms that we'd be forced to be in a position of having to pay something back and be in a worse position to have to do that. So again, to me, I understand, I think, where Councillor Bonner's coming from, but I can't support his argument. To me, any minor adjustments this year might look good politically, but I don't think they're in the best long-term interests of the city. I think it's unlikely that any very modest tax relief we could offer would help our local economy recover more than having that money for the city used to create jobs. And I think all levels of government are going to have to increase in economic stimulus, and the only way we can do that is with our city's cash flow. We're putting taxpayers in a place of having to pay more in future when they can afford it less if we don't stay the course now. So again, I'm in favor of option 1. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to clarify a point, option 2 actually, if I'm correct, is asking for $800,000 from the Special Initiatives Reserve, and that reserve we don't have to pay back.
That is correct.
That's correct. So the idea that if we're taking out reserves, we have to put it back, in this particular case, is not the case.
In option 2, that money doesn't need to be repaid back to that reserve.
Thank you.
I am, I won't say surprised, but I'm certainly pleased with what is the relative unanimity of this council, notwithstanding what other councils have done, to take this position, to look at the numbers themselves, the actual dollar amounts, as opposed to being caught up in the press view of this, which will be probably sadly focus on the percentage increase, which in comparison to a 2% wage increase, for instance, for our city workers under their contract, looks substantially higher. Councillor Bonner did comment about we need to show an example, and I appreciate what he's trying to say around the example. But it's not council as somehow an entity that this is our money and our services. They are the people's services and the people's money. And when we cut back on those services or reduce those services, it is the people who are suffering. The very people who, yes, pay for it through their taxation directly and indirectly, but it is they who are suffering. And I'm much moved by Councillor Martman's remarks and Councillor Armstrong tonight, who've reminded us that we're in the relatively easy part now, potentially. If things go brilliantly and we don't have a second wave of virus and the economy starts to go back to the full speed it was largely operating at, if we return to the record levels of unemployment that haven't existed since I was a kid in this country, if we see that kind of return to economic prosperity, because frankly the fundamentals of the economy were strong before the virus hit, you know, people will say this council should have given us a break last year because this year we don't need a break particularly. And I understand that. And I understand that many councils have chosen what I will call a more political route. But this council, it appears to me, based on what I have heard from council so far tonight, has chosen what I will call a much more courageous route. It has looked at what the services that are important to this community, and I'm looking up at Chief Fry now and thinking of this pressure and stress that are placed on the firefighters in this community, We still have an opioid crisis. They are still attending people who literally are dying in front of them and whose lives are saved by their efforts. I'm thinking of all the good people who pick up the recycling and the garbage, come hell or high water, day after day, week after week. All of those people. If we want to talk about belt tightening, let's talk about the 200 people who were impacted, to use the neutral language, impacted by our entirely required and appropriate decision to shut basically all of our recreational facilities in this community. Think how they're feeling. Full-time, part-time, and contractors. Mercifully, some of them we've been able to find and allocate other positions and work to them. But as an entity, there are people who have already suffered, belts have been tightened beyond belief, and who face a grim prospect. But I think at this time, at this stage in a period of incredible uncertainty, I think this is the right thing to do. I honestly felt it was the right thing to do. I didn't have the courage to start off tonight saying that. But I want to extend again my compliments to council, who I think has showed a kind of strength that is to be admired. So unless I have said something that has inspired somebody else to say something, I'm going to call for the vote, and the vote is on option 1. All those in favor? Contrary? Councillor Bonner, Councillor Turley, what say you? I hope we haven't lost Councillor.
Sorry, I was muted. Contrary.
I've called the vote. We're voting on option 1, not amended. Are you in favor?
Yeah, I heard all that. The problem was I had muted myself, so I didn't make comments. I forgot to unmute myself. So I'm voting opposed.
Opposed. So Councillors Bonner and Turley are opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, Council. The next item is the Community Policing and Service Office, 18 Victoria Crescent. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is certainly a subject which Council is well aware of, as I think we've had the opportunity to brief you on it once or twice since this Council was elected. The history of the Community Policing Service Office in the downtown is outlined in the report, so I'm not going to go into great detail on it, but just a couple of highlights for people that are maybe watching from home. Is certainly community policing officers have a long tradition, and even in Nanaimo we've had offices downtown. There used to be the office downtown here on Wharf Street, just next to the hotel. Operated for a number of years. Then in 2007, we jointly opened what was called and remains the CPSO office, and that was opened on Victoria and included both those continuation of the RCMP services, but included bylaw and security and those elements working in the downtown. Since that time, there's been continual changes to that group, and early on, the RCMP redeployed their staff that were in that community service office and pulled them out to work on other priorities. In 2012, there was further changes where the city at that time decided to bring all the parking in-house, and as a result, the parking bylaw officers related to parking and the parking clerk were cited out of the CPSO office. In 2018, this item was brought before the Public Services Committee at the time, and there was a recommendation to continue on with this facility, but to look for other partners and potential service agencies to work jointly out of that center and help deliver services in the downtown. There was some exploration on attempting to identify those partners, but to date it's been unsuccessful, and we do not believe there's potential to have those partners working in this space. So, Your Worship, all this I'm trying to say is the space has evolved over time from 2007 to today. Certainly the nature of the work going out of that location has moved to primarily focus just on parking with a parking clerk being just the sole staff member that is in that office for the majority of the day. From time to time, the bylaw officers do check in there in the morning and in the evening, but most of the day are out and around downtown. The site costs us approximately $40,000 a year to operate, plus utilities and additional cleaning. And there is space in the existing service and resource center to reallocate and relocate those staff up and consolidate the service that we provide to the community. So both from an operational perspective and a customer service perspective, we're recommending the council discontinue the use of the CPSO office and proceed with the closure of that facility.
Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Turley.
Move the recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Hemmens. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship, to you and Mr. Lindsay. What, if any, is the cost to cancel the lease? Or is there an option of no cost to get out of it?
Through the worship to Councillor Turley, it's a month to month at this point, so it would just simply be a 30-day notice.
Okay. Thank you.
So over the 4-year plan, we're going to save $160,000 plus the financial plan we just voted on.
We could lower taxes.
We might be able to. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Turley, what say you?
In favor.
In favor? Passed. Thank you very much. The next is liquor license application number LA 142-940 Old Victoria Road. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. But I will mention on these next 3 items that I do, and I would normally have him sitting beside me, is our director, Mr. Holm. He's here this evening and he's in the audience. So if there's any more technical questions that I can answer, I may call upon him for assistance. This next item, liquor license application. Council has seen this application most recently in March, where it was brought to you for your information. Since that time, there's been notification out to the surrounding property owners. We've received 2 responses. Both of those are in favor of amending the hours. So the hours, if this is endorsed by council and ultimately approved, would go from noon to various hours depending on the day of the week, but the latest operating hour is 8 p.m. at this point. So from noon to 8 p.m. and the proposal is to go from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Councillor Thorpe here first.
I was just going to move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Councillor Armstrong is seconding. Any discussion? Everybody's read the material, obviously. All those in favor? Councillor Turley, what say you?
In favor.
In favor? Passed. Thank you very much. The next is probably one of the least controversial things we'll ever deal with. Mapping amendments to the zoning bylaw. Mr. Lindsay, try and make it exciting. Beat Mr. Sims.
Well, I would start by saying anything to do with the zoning bylaw is exciting. So, Your Worship, this is 27 what we would normally call housekeeping or general amendments to the bylaw, things that have come to staff's attention over the months or years. A number of these have been generated as simply as we've moved our systems internally, our mapping systems, and some of these very minor boundary errors have been identified and we're proposing to be corrected. This is also a time where we bring forward properties that were obtained through subdivision for park, and it allows us to zone those lands park to reflect the proposed use. Your Worship, I would note that these reports you receive are drafted about 2 to 3 weeks before the actual meeting night, and in the recommendation is a recommendation that council waive the public hearing. Now, this was in the context, of course, of COVID-19 and the directions we had from the province to date. Of course, there's always an option, even before the pandemic and the emergency, there's always an option for council to waive public hearings related to zoning bylaw amendments where they are consistent with the official community plan. And Your Worship, all of these amendments are felt to be consistent with the official community plan. So waiving the public hearing continues to be, as outlined in the report, a recommendation that council may wish to consider. As we'll talk about more in the next item, which was actually deferred from last Monday, last week we were expecting, and we received on Friday, an amendment to the Ministerial Order 83, a new Ministerial Order 139. which gives further guidance around public hearings and actually gives council the ability to have what they're calling electronic public hearings. Not a lot of details for local government. It's kind of left for us to sort out how that would work, whether that's people phoning in or e-town hall or something similar. But there is an opportunity for council to have now an electronic public hearing, and that could be a wholly electronic public hearing, or it could be a combination of our traditional public hearings with the additional ability for people to present to you either over the phone or via Skype or something similar. Your Worship, that's a summary of our report.
You, Mr. Lindsay. Is someone going to make the recommended motion? Ms. Gurry, Councillor Turley has a question.
No, Your Worship, usually the acting mayor would read out these bylaw
I appreciate
readings, and so it's Councillor Turley. So Councillor Martman is the next one, unless Councillor Turley is comfortable doing it.
Councillor Martman, you can read out the motions tonight. Thank you, please.
Zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 4500.175 to amend Schedule A zoning map with general mapping amendments past first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 4500.175 past second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. It's just an interesting question. I'm trying to, as you said, make this interesting. A number of months ago, we did a textual update to the bylaws, so spelling errors and things like that. And this is now a mapping change of, moving boundaries and stuff like that. Do these come on a fairly regular basis, or are they just whenever you get the time?
Your Worship, I would say we would typically see a package, and quite often it's a package of both. It's a mapping and text amendments, and we would generally see those about once a year come before council. I think if you looked over the last 8 to 10 years, you'd probably see on average one package per year come before council.
Good, thank you. Just curious.
Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Martman, please.
Council waive the public hearing for zoning amendment bylaw 2020 number 4500.175 pursuant to Local Government Act Section 4742.
Ms. Gurry?
I just want to make sure council is clear that we will be looking into public hearing options. So what Mr. Lindsay was saying is you could alter this. You're perfectly allowed to waive it, but you could alter this.
Yes, thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed?
Was there a second?
Sorry, did we? You're quite right, Councillor Thorpe. Seconded by Councillor Bonner. No discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is rezoning application RA 449-5801 Turner Road. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. And this item was on your agenda last week, and it was deferred to this agenda specifically for the opportunity to have a discussion around public hearings and the pending guidance that was to be coming from the province. So as I mentioned, that came out on Friday. The province, I'm not going to go through it in any detail, but in general terms, the province, through the order and the associated guidelines, has said that councils can hold electronic public hearings. So if council, there's two options, I guess, before council. One is to continue on with the recommendations, and would result in the waiver of the public hearing. The second option, which is without any further direction from council, you already have a motion taking this item to a public hearing. So if council passed the motion here, you'd be waiving it. Without any further direction from council, we'd be sending this item to the next available public hearing with whatever we were able to figure out around what electronic public hearing means in the context of Nanaimo and how that would work, yet to be determined.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. My question is, I believe we had one email regarding this from I'll call him a competitor. I would think the least thing we should do would be to reach out to him and indicate that we now have information from the province allowing us to do electronic, and did he wish to make a presentation about his concerns, or was his concern more about just the fact that there was no public hearing and we were just going to waive it, and whereas he and all the others had to go through the process? Having said that, I don't think there were too many people speaking in favor or opposed to most of the applications that came in the first place. So it is a bit of a moot point, but I think courtesy would suggest that we should at least pass along the information to him.
Prior to making a motion then, if I may ask, if we've already put this to go to a public hearing, however the public hearing may look like in electronic form or the letter, I believe the competitor was concerned about proximity to other cannabis stores and wasn't aware of liquor stores across the street from each other. But other than that, you're right, we don't hear many concerns about cannabis site-specific locations. And so I don't know if we need to make any motions now, if we're just going to go forward.
If we do nothing, then it goes to a public hearing in the format that will be determined by the provincial government, essentially, in terms of their direction, and we can proceed with it potentially electronically if we do nothing. If we proceed with the motion tonight, the public hearing will be waived, and this will be the end of it. Councillor Thorpe, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship. In the previous item, the exciting mapping amendments, I was willing to waive the public hearing aspect of that, but I would prefer not to waive the public hearing for the cannabis outlet. I think in fairness, we've not done that before, and we've been told now that there will be provisions for being able to hold some type of public hearing. So I would support us taking no action tonight and moving ahead to a public hearing. Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong?
I support what Councillor Thorpe says. There is opposition to this, and I think the people should have the opportunity, as we do with all other ones, to come forward. Thank you.
For what it's worth, seeing no other speakers, I'm in agreement with the previous speakers on this one, that it should proceed to a public hearing. It's not going to be the kind of public hearing we're used to, but it's the best we can manage in the middle of a pandemic. So unless someone makes a motion, we are on to bylaws. The bylaw status sheet is for information only. We have no notice of his motion. Sorry? Question period. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. So in best efforts to assist the community in their ability to engage council, staff came up with, based on the previous guidelines sent out by the province for Ministerial Order M083, where it states that we should look for electronic ways to engage, and having heard some feedback, we decided to attempt an online question fill-out form, not unlike our delegation request form, for council meetings. Didn't think through the logistics very well, so we will be revisiting how to work this better. The cutoff for questions was 3 p.m. on the meeting day, which doesn't give very much time to go through the questions for council either, though they were all distributed to you before the meeting started. And I have had a chance to read through them, and I thankfully think most of them were answered during the agenda items 8, B, C, and D. So what I am going to do this evening is all questions, comments have been circulated to council in their entirety, and should council wish to comment, they could do so at this time. I will read out the name of the person who submitted the comment/question and cite the agenda item for council's convenience. And if council wishes to address any of these questions at this time, then they could do so. So I'm just going to read the list and what agenda item.
Councillor Armstrong.
Before we do that, I'm wondering if we could just defer all these questions to a GPC where we have a talk on this specific topic. Because then we're going to have the staff available that can answer it. Most of them have already been answered because we can't answer some of the stuff without the staff people here to answer the questions. Thank you.
So a couple things to that, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Armstrong. So I do believe most of these were answered. It is up to council whether they wish to answer now or at a future date. We could look at having a GPC on this topic. So the 17 questions that were all came in were all to do with 8B, C, and D. So I'm just going to read the list and then council can provide me direction. So we had Lynn Thomas, 8B, traffic calming. Lynn Thomas, 8B, traffic calming. Darcy Ambler, 8B, traffic calming. Ian Gartshore, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Taryn Silver, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Nick Camucci, pardon me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Wendy Thomas, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Lynn Thompson, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Wendy Toms, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Wanda Thompson, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Linda Walker, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. John DeCombe, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Wanda Thompson, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Darcy Ambler, 8C, pedestrian infrastructure. Robert Weston, 8D, allocation of unallocated pedestrian funds. Wendy Thompson, 8D, allocation of unallocated pedestrian funds. And Darcy Ambler for 8D, allocation of unallocated pedestrian funds. So there was 17, and they were quite lengthy in their commentary, but I had to look through, and a lot of these were answered. If council wishes to answer them, they have had some time to have a look through. But we will work on our process.
Thank you. I might say before I go to Councillor Hemmons that it would appear to me that we may have a repetitive questioner here in terms of the use of a name, but that's a question for another day. And I think, Ms. Gurry, your comments that much of this has been answered during the very fulsome discussion earlier tonight is appropriate, which is why, notwithstanding, although I'm often sympathetic to Councillor Armstrong, I don't want to see it go to a GPC. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I didn't want this to pass without noting that I believe it could be reasonable to believe that one person wrote the vast majority of these emails, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to understand the avenues that are available to us to communicate with council, and I believe that council is doing everything we can to be available to the public. I can't imagine anyone around this table not being open to taking a call from a resident, and I think if my assumptions are correct, it's an abuse of the system that we're trying to create to help people have access to us at this time, and I mean, I can't prove it, but I'm disappointed deeply if that's the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you for being sympathetic in some things. However, I do really want to have more conversation around this, especially as to how we get our priorities, because I think we heard tonight a lot of councillors don't know how we get there. And I think it's really important that we sit down, because in the active transportation plan, it does put pedestrians first. And I don't think any of us were here when that was done, except for possibly Councillor Thorpe. And I think we need to have a fulsome discussion on where our priorities for sidewalks are, whether it be, we want to, like I said, I believe in a matrix system where we look at vulnerable populations such as children and seniors. Number of accidents at a crosswalk would come into play, or things like that, or number of speeding tickets issued on a road. I think it's really important. I think, you know, as we move forward, and we do think we're going to see more, and I'm not just talking pedestrians, but bikes as well, I think we need to have a more fulsome discussion around that so people understand how these decisions are made. Like, we had, you know, some good stuff here, but I really think it needs to be more in depth, because it's really important to a lot of people. And, you know, even for myself, I mean, we all know I'm a car person, but I do think we need to look at how can we get people out of their cars more. And I think we need to have that big discussion, and at the end of the day, it may come out with, you know what, we can't do it for this reason. Or yeah, we can, but guess what? You're going to have to make a decision that you might not fund two positions someplace in order to do that. And I think that needs to be done not behind closed doors or whatever. It needs to be done in front of the general public that elected us. And as some of them said, there's many that were elected based on active transportation. And I just really do believe we need to have a more fulsome discussion around it. And in that, I'd also include transit, because we're going to be facing some big decisions around transit, and that's going to come into play on our future decisions as well. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I misunderstood. I thought the ask about the GPC was to discuss the topic of question period, these questions, and the general topic of question period. So I don't disagree with Councillor Armstrong, but I would, at some point, like to talk about question period. And I think it has strayed well away from the original intent, which was to allow members of the media to ask for clarification on agenda items that they were doing stories on and needed some follow-up information. If what Councillor Hemmons is suggesting, and I have no idea, but if that is true, then that is an abusive process, and I'd be very concerned about it. So maybe it is a conversation we need to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We know what the... Moved, Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor, motion carried. Thank you very much, everyone.